Chapter 27 of The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Devvon Eubanks. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. Ishtar, show thy face. Breathlessly, Kenton stared at this strange twin. There was the same square jaw, firm-lipped dark face, the same clear blue eyes. What was the mystery of that resemblance? Chance or illusion of sorcery? Claneth! His mind groped toward the Black Priest's plot. Was this to be Sharane's lover? Some flash of understanding half illumined his mind, too brief to be more than half caught. It left him groping again. Through the stone he heard the Persian cursing. Then, "Wolf, are you behind me?" he muttered. "Are you truly behind me, Wolf?" "Yes," he shouted. "I am here, Zubran. That is not I." His gaze flew back to the priest of Bel, began now to take note of subtle differences in their two faces. The lips were not so firm. The corners of the mouth drew down. There was a hint of indecision about them and the chin. And the eyes were strained, shadowed with half-wild, half-agonized longing. Silent, tense, the priest of Bel looked over the lifted head of the Lady Narada, her lithe body as rigid as his own, unheeding her, intent upon that hidden portal through which he had come. The lanced crimson flame upon the altar flickered, swayed. "The gods got us," he heard the bold-eyed woman say. "Be silent! What is the matter?" said the Assyrian. The woman whispered, "Did you see the cherubs? They glared at the priest. They moved toward him." The woman with the babe said, "I saw it. I am frightened." The Assyrian said, "It was the light on the altar. It flickered." Said the Phrygian low, "Perhaps it was the cherubs. Are they not Bel's messengers? Did you not say the priests loved Bel's woman?" "Silence there!" rang the voice of the officer from behind the double ring. The priest began a low chanting. In the eyes of the priest a fire began to glow. His lips quivered, his body bent forward as though drawn by an unseen cord. Across the wide place came a woman, alone. She was cloaked from neck to feet in purple. Her head was swathed in golden veils. Kenton knew her. His heart leaped madly toward her. His blood raced. He quivered under such a shock of longing that it seemed as though his leaping heart must perforce break beneath it. "Sharane!" he called, forgetting. And again, "Sharane!" She glided through the opened ranks of the men-at-arms, kneeling to her as she passed. Straight to the altar she paced and stood there, silent, motionless beside the priest of Bel. Came a louder rolling of the metallic thunder. As it died away, the priest turned to the altar, lifted his hands high. From his attendants droned a long, sustained humming upon a single deep note. Up and out swept the priest's arms. 7 times he bowed low before the crimson flame. He stood upright. Down upon their knees dropped archers and spearsmen. With a rustling of bows, a muffled beating of spear shafts. Still to that weird humming, the priest of Bel began his invocation. "All merciful among the gods, all bull-necked among the gods, Bel Merodach, king of the heavens and the worlds, heavens and earths are thine, breather of life art thou. Thy house is prepared for thee. We worship and await." Kenton heard a whisper, tremulous, golden, "I worship and await." Sharane's voice! the golden voice of Sharane playing upon every taut nerve of him like myriads of little fingers over stretched harp strings. Again the priest of Bel, O begetter, O self-begotten, O beautiful one who givest life to the babe, O merciful one who givest life to the dead, King art thou of Izida, Lord of Amactala. A resting place for the King of Heaven is thy house. A resting place for the Lord of worlds is thy house. We worship and await thee. And once more, Sharane, tremulous, I worship and await thee. The priest intoned, Lord of the silent weapon, look favorably on thy house, O Lord of rest. May Izida speak peace to thee in thy house. May Amactala speak rest to thee in thy house. We worship and await thee. And again, Sharane, I worship and await thee. Now Kenton saw the priest make toward the altar a gesture in which lurked an inexplicable defiance. He turned and faced Sharane. His voice rang loudly, jubilantly. Full of delight is thy supremacy. Opener of the lock of morning art thou. Opener of the lock of evening art thou. To open the lock of the heavens is thy supremacy. I worship and await thee. At the first words the humming of the priests ceased. Kenton saw them stir, glance at each other uncertainly, saw a ripple pass through kneeling soldiers and worshippers as their heads raised, heard murmuring, astonished, uneasy. Beneath him the kneeling Assyrian muttered, That was not in the ritual. The Persian asked, What was not in the ritual? The woman said, That the priest cried last. It is not Bel's. It belongs to our lady Ishtar. The youth whispered, Yes, yes, he knows her too. She is Ishtar. The woman with the babe sobbed, Did you see the cherubs stretch their claws? I am frightened. I am frightened, and it is not good for the child's milk. The light on the altar is like spilled blood. Said the Assyrian uneasily, I do not like it. It was not in Bel's ritual, and the storm is coming fast. The Lady Narada rose abruptly. Her handmaids bent over drums and harps, set their pipes to lips. A soft and amorous theme beat up from them, delicate, clinging, like the beating of the wings of countless doves, the clinging of countless little soft arms, the throbbing of countless little rosy hearts. Under it, the body of the Lady Narada swayed like a green reed at the first touch of roving wings of spring. The multitude looked, sighed once, and were still. But Kenton saw that the priest's eyes never left Sharane, standing like a woman asleep beneath her veils. Louder the music sounded, quicker, throbbing with all love-longing, laden with all passion, hot as the simoom. To it, as though her body drank in each calling imperious note, turned it into motion, made it articulate in flesh, the Lady Narada began to dance. Again Kenton, looking on her, forgot that lost love of his, and now so near. For in the midnight eyes that had been so sorrowful, many little leaping joyous stars danced. The scarlet mouth was a luring, honey-sweet flame promising unknown raptures, and the swarms of golden butterflies meshed within her gossamer nets of jet hovered, swept down, clung to, and caressed the rose and pearl of her body as though she were some wondrous flower. They were clouds of golden butterflies darting upon her, covering with kisses all her lovelinesses, gleaming within the cloudy nets that swirled about her, yet had no single exquisite curve. Maddening, breathless grew dance and music, and in music and dance Kenton watched mating stars, embracing suns, moons swollen with birth. Gathered in them he sensed all passion, all fire, white desire of all women under stars and suns and moons, and the slumberous fragrance of the withering passion flower. The music slowed, softened. The dancer was still. From all the multitude a soft sighing arose. He heard Zubran, his voice hoarse. "Who is that dancer? She is like a flame. She is like the flame that danced before Ormuzd on the altar of the 10,000 sacrifices." The woman jealously. "She danced in the wooing of Bel by Ishtar. She has danced it many times. Nothing new in that." The Frisian said maliciously, "He asked who she is?" The woman said spitefully, "Gods, that dance is no new thing, I tell you. Many women have danced it." The Assyrian said, "She is the Lady Narada. She belongs to Bel." The Persian said wrathfully, "Are all the fair women in this country Bel's? By the 9 hells, Cyrus the king would have given 10 talents of gold for her." "Hush," whispered the Assyrian, and the other two echoed him, "Hush." The Lady Narada had begun once more to dance. The music grew louder, but now it was languorous, dripping sweetness, distilling the very dew of desire, but no longer desire-seeking, no, desire fulfilled. And once more the Lady Narada was mated to the sounds, was one with them, the blood hammered hot in Kenton's veins. "She dances the surrender of Ishtar to Bel." It was the Assyrian, gloating. The Persian stood upright. "Aye," he cried, "Cyrus would have given not 10, but 50 talents of gold for her. She is a flame," cried Zubran, and his voice was thick, clogged. "And if she is Bel's, why then does she look so upon the priest?" None heard him in the roaring of the multitude, soldiers and worshippers. None of them had eyes or ears for anything but the dancer. Nor had Kenton. Then witchery of the midnight woman was broken from him. Raging at himself, he beat against the stone, for the tranquility of Sharane had broken. Her white hand thrust aside the shrouding purple folds. She turned, moved swiftly away toward that hidden entrance from which she had come. The dancer stopped. The music died. Again came the uneasy movement of the multitude, a louder murmuring. That was not in the ritual. The Assyrian sprang to his feet. The dance is not yet finished. There was a clashing of thunder almost overhead. "She grows impatient for the god, perhaps," the woman said cynically. "Or perhaps she thinks he awaits her." And again Kenton felt his hands tingle with the desire to strangle her. "Lady Ishtar! Lady Ishtar!" he heard the youth cry out. There was a louder murmuring about them. The soldiers turned threateningly. "She is Ishtar! She is the moon hiding her face behind a little cloud." The youth took a step toward the men-at-arms guarding the priestess. The bold-eyed woman arose, caught his arm. She spoke to the soldiers. "He is mad. He lives at my house. Do not hurt him. I will take him away." But the youth broke away from her, thrust her aside, darted through the guards, and raced across the square to meet the advancing priestess. He threw himself at her hurrying feet. He hid his face in the hem of her cloak. She paused, regarding him through her veils. Instantly, Bel's priest was at her side. He thrust a foot against the youth's face brutally, sent him rolling a yard away. "Ho! Alrak! Drukar! Take this man!" he shouted. 2 officers came running to him, swords drawn. The attendant priests clustered, whispering. All the multitude was silent. And, like a cat, the youth twisted, sprang upon his feet, faced the priestess. "Ishtar," he cried, "show me thy face, then let me die." She stood silent, as though she neither heard nor saw. The soldier seized him, drew back his arms, and then, visibly, strength flowed into that slight frame. He seemed to expand, to grow in height. He threw the soldiers from him. He smote the priest of Bel across the eyes. He gripped the veils of the priestess. "I will not die until I see thy face, O Ishtar," he cried, and so crying tore the veils away. Where the veils had been was the face of Sharane, but not the Sharane of the ship, vital, filled with the fire of life. No. Here was a Sharane of wide, unseen eyes, upon whose white-browed dream sat throned. A woman whose body moved through reality, but whose mind was freed of all that was real. A mind that floated through linked labyrinths of illusion. Sharane, what had the blue priest said? A woman with a mind asleep. The priest of Bel's voice shrilled, vibrant with hate. "Sacrilege! Slay that man!" The swords of the 2 captains bit through the youth's breast. He fell, still holding tight the veils. Sharane looked down upon him, unconcerned. "Ishtar," he gasped. "I have seen you, Ishtar." His eyes glazed. Sharane tore the veils from his stiffening hands, threw the tattered remains over her face. Swiftly she swept on to the temple, was gone from Kenton's straining sight. The priest of Bel watched her go, the hell in which his heart seethed, blackening his face. His gaze dropped upon the twitching body of the youth. He stamped upon it, beckoned. Men came forward and dragged it away. From the multitude a clamor arose. Archers and spearsmen began to push back the throng through the forest of the slender, lacquered pillars, sifted among them, vanished with those they herded. Past the priest of Bel went his soldiers and acolytes, and after them slipped the harpers, the pipers, and the drum girls of the Lady Narada. Within that vast court circled by the elfin shafts remained only dancer and priest. The lurid sky darkened steadily. The slow churning movement of the clouds had become more rapid. Under the ochreous shadows, the lanced flame on the altar of Bel shone brighter, angrily, like a lifted scarlet sword. Around the crouching cherubs, the shadows thickened. The metallic thundering had become continuous, marching closer. With the passing of Sharane, Kenton would have opened that other door of bronze. Something counseled him that the time had not yet come, that a little longer he must wait. And as he waited, dancer and priest drifted to that strange window through which he peered. Close to him, they paused. End of chapter 27.
Chapter 28 of The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recordings. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Dodi. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. Guile of the Black Priest. Bel should be pleased with his worship, priest, Kenton heard the dancer say. The priest asked dully, "What do you mean?" The Lady Narada drew closer to him. Her hands fluttered out to him. "Shalamu," she whispered. "Did I dance for the god? You know I danced for you. And whom did you worship, Shalamu, the god? No, the priestess. And whom, think you, did she worship? She worshipped Bel, our Lord Bel, who has all, the priest answered bitterly. Said the dancer mockingly, She worshipped herself, Shalamu. He repeated stubbornly, wearily, She worshipped Bel. Closer came the Lady Narada, touched him with fluttering, yearning hands. Does any woman worship a god, Shalamu? She asked. Ah, no, I am a woman, and I know. This priestess would be a god's woman, no man's. She holds herself too high, too precious for man. She loves herself, she worships herself. She would bow down to herself as a god's woman. Women make gods of men and then love them, but no woman loves any god she has not made, Shalamu. The priest said sullenly, Well, I worshipped her. The dancer said eagerly, As she worshipped herself? Shalamu, does she long to give joy to Bel, to our Lord Bel who has Ishtar? Can we give joy to the gods who have all? The lotus rises to the sun. But is it to give joy to the sun that she rises? No, it is to give joy to herself. So the priestess, I am a woman, and I know. Her hands were on his shoulders. He took them in his own. Why do you say these things to me? She drew a step away from him. Shalamu, she murmured, look in my eyes, look on my mouth, my breast. Like the priestess, I am the god's, but I give myself to you, beloved. He said dreamily, Yea, you are very beautiful. Her arms were around his neck, her lips close to his. Do I love the god? She whispered. When I dance, is it to delight his eyes? It is for you I dance, beloved. It is for you I dare Bel's wrath. Softly she drew his head down on her breast. Am I not fair? Fairer than this priestess who is Bel's and worships herself, nor will ever give herself to you? Are not my perfumes pleasing? No god possesses me, beloved. Dreamily he answered her again. Yea, you are very fair. I love you, Shalamu. He thrust her from him. His eyes were full of dream, and half he chanted. Yet her eyes are like the pools of peace in the valley of forgetfulness. When she comes near me, the doves of Ishtar beat their wings above my head. She walks upon my heart. The Lady Narada drew back, scarlet lips pale, brows a menacing straight line, agony in her eyes. The priestess? The priestess, he answered. Her hair is like the cloud that veils the sun at dusk. The wave of her robe scorches me as the wind from the desert noon scorches the palm. The wave of her robe makes me cold as the wind of the desert night makes cold the palm. The priestess? She asked again, and as before he echoed, The priestess. She said coldly, almost indifferently, That youth was bolder far than you, priest. Even in the growing dark, Kenton saw the red rush to the priest's face. He caught her hands. What do you mean? He snarled. Why did you have the youth slain? Coldly as before came her voice. He answered hotly. He did sacrilege. She stopped him contemptuously. Because he was bolder than you, because he dared to tear the veils from her, because he was brave and wise, because you knew yourself the coward. That is why you had him slain. His hands twitched to her throat. You lie, I would dare. Again she laughed. You did not even dare to slay him yourself. His hands were at her throat. She thrust them carelessly aside. Coward, she said. He dared to lift the veil from what he loved. He dared the wrath both of Ishtar and of Bel. The priest cried brokenly, Would I not dare? Do I fear death? Do I fear Bel? Her eyes mocked him. "Hi, you who love so greatly," she taunted. "The priestess awaits the god in his lonely house. Perhaps he is not in the storm. Perchance he tarries with another maid. O fearless one, bold lover, take his place." He shrank back from her. "Take his place," he whispered, fear, awe, and daunting hope in face and voice. "You know where the armor of the god is hidden. Unless you are coward, take his place. Go to her as the god," she said. For a long moment the priest stood, quivering. Then Kenton saw irresolution fly, decision take its place. The priest strode to the altar, went down the last flame, wavered, died. In the sudden dark the crouching cherubs seemed monstrously to take wing. There came a flash of the weird prismatic lightning. By its irised flare he saw the priest of Bel passing swiftly along that way Sharane had come and gone. Saw the Lady Narada lying huddled in her nets of jet, the sipping flocks of golden butterflies that rest upon her. Heard a low, heartbroken wailing. Slowly Kenton's hand began to slip from the lever. Now was the time to use that key, pass on where the blue priest had pointed. His hand froze upon the lever. A shadow, blacker than the dusk without, had passed the window, stood over the dancer, a huge and unwieldy bulk, familiar. "Claneth!" "Good," rumbled the black priest, and touched her with his foot. "Now soon neither he nor Sharane shall trouble you more, and you have well earned the reward I promised you." The Lady Narada looked up at him with white and piteous face, stretched shaking hands out to him. "If he had loved me," she wailed, "never would he have gone. If he had loved me but a little, never would I have let him go. But he angered me, he shamed me, throwing back to me the love I offered him. Not for you, Black Snake, despite our bargain, did I send him to her and to death." "Well," laughed Claneth, "whatever your reason, you sent him. He is gone, and here is your reward." He dropped a handful of flashing jewels into her outstretched palms. She screamed, open fingers as though the gems burned her. They fell and rolled about the stones. "If he had loved me, if he had loved me but a little," sobbed the Lady Narada, and crouched again, a huddled heap among her butterflies. Again the black priest laughed, then hurried toward the temple. Kenton, to him now clear all the black priest's plot, let the lever go, raced to the farther door of bronze, thrust the wedged key into it, slipped past the slowly opening edge, and ran down the passageway it had barred. Two flames burned in him as he raced along that passage. White flame of love for his woman, black flame of hate against Claneth. He knew that wherever the priest of Bel was bound, there must be Sharane. The black priest's plot had been well laid, the trap expertly baited. The end, unless Kenton could reach the bower of Bel in time and conquer, inevitable. It was the evil cunning of the black priest that had coached Narada. Not for an instant did he believe that the dancer's surrender of herself to the priest had been part of the plot. She loved him. There could be no doubt of that. And if he had not tossed that surrender back to her, but he had rejected it, and in her shame and anger she had pointed out to him the way of possession of his god's priestess, had counseled him to the supreme sacrilege, had thrown him into the arms of Sharane for his own destruction and hers. Narada had repented, but too late. The black priest had gambled, and the black priest had won. Kenton cursed as he ran. If Sharane, meshed in ensorcelled dream, saw the priest of Bel as the god himself, still would she have taken earthly lover. Her innocence could not save her. Claneth would see to that. He would hint of other visits, nay, without doubt would have witnesses to swear to them. And if Sharane should awaken, God, would she not in the dawn of that awakening take the priest of Bel for him, for Kenton? But either way, the presence of priest and priestess in Bel's bower would be enough to damn them both. Yes, Claneth would see to that. A hope came to him. Gigi, the Viking, the Persian. Might they even now be climbing the outer stairway, slaying the sentries as they crept up? Might they not reach Bell's Bower in time to save Sharane? Also, never might they reach there. He must not let that hope take edge off his driving purpose, his fear. He himself must reach her in time. Had not the Blue Priest told him that the issue lay in his own hands, no others? He crossed a traverse passage, ran blindly down a sloping corridor, along whose sides glared guarding chimerae, stopped in front of a wide portal from which hung, motionless and rigid, folds that seemed carved from solid silver. Caution whispered to him. He put out a hand, parted with a sense of profanation the metallic curtainings, peered within. He looked into his own room. Yes, there it lay before him, his old room in his old world. He saw the jeweled ship, glimmering, glittering, but as though he saw it through a fog, through a mist of fiery particles, half veiling it. The long mirror glinted behind that same luminous vapor. Infinitely small, in infinite numbers, the sparkling atoms hung between him and that room of his back in New York, and he here in this strange world. Misty was the room, nebulous, quivering now into plainer sight, now withdrawing into indefiniteness. And as he stared at it, incredulous, the old bleak despair clutching him, he felt within his hands the curtains grow light as silken gauze, stiffened back into metal, alternately, slipped from his hands, strengthened within them as the room steadied in the sparkling mist, dissolved within it into phantom outlines. Yet ever as the room swung inward clearer, swung back dimmer, the outlines of the jeweled ship hardened, crystallized, shone forth brighter, summoning him, dragging him back. End of chapter 28.
Chapter 29 of The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. The Gods and Man's Desire. Kenton braced himself, held tight for the curtains. He fought with all his will to check their melting as his old room that held the jeweled ship swung between spectral unreality and hard actuality. The curtains were like bars between his old world and this of his great adventure, bars between the world of Sharane and the world he loathed. A force, a pull like a strong undertow, dragged him forward irresistibly each time the curtains melted in his hands, and the nebulous outlines of his room crisped into steadiness. And plainly he could pick out every detail of that room, the long mirror, the cabinets, the divan, the stains of his blood still wet upon the floor. And always, whether room were melting mist or clear outline, the jeweled ship shone steadily, watchful. Now he swung out and over that room. The ancient Chinese rug of its floor was below him, at once close and infinite distances away. He heard the first voices of the shrieking winds of space. In that brief instance, he realized that it was the shining toy itself drawing him out of the world of Sharane. Something was reaching up and out to him from the dark deck of the ship. Something malignant and mocking, dragging him to it. The same thought he fleetingly had held when he had hovered over the real ship in its hidden harbor. No fleeting thought now, but certainty. Darker grew the black deck, stronger its pull. "Ishtar," he prayed, gaze upon the rosy cabin. "Ishtar." Did the cabin flash as though filled with sudden light? A light which penetrated, numbed, the dark power dragging him to it? The outlines of his room melted. Again the curtains were heavy in his hands. He stood once more on firm feet at the threshold of the house of the moon god. Once, twice, thrice more the room pulled back, but each time less real, more spectral. And against each pulse Kenton set his will. closed eyes and thrust away the vision of it with all his strength, forced himself not to think of what that apparent resurgence of evil power on the black deck might mean, concentrated every thought, every atom of will on banishment of room and toy ship where they belonged, in his old world. His soul for Sharane's. Never would he be drawn back there again. His will won. The room vanished. In that vanishment, a finality not to be mistaken. The spell was broken. The subtle link snapped. Now he could go on. Caught by the reaction, he clung to the curtains, knees weak and shaking. Slowly he found himself, resolutely parted the folds. He looked now into a vast hall filled with mist of argent light. Still was this mist, yet palpable, as though the rays that formed it were woven. Interlaced and luminous, the webbed mist made of the chamber a home of immensities, of tremendous distance. He thought, but was not sure, that there was motion within these silver webs, shadowy shapes half appearing, vanishing, never quite coming into full sight. Far away he caught another movement. A figure was coming forward, steadily, inexorably. It drew closer, slowly. It swam into sight. A man, golden helmeted, over his shoulder a short cloak of gold, shot through with scarlet, in his hand a golden sword, head bent, pushing on as though against some strong current. It was the priest of Bel, clad in the raiment of his god. Scarce breathing, Kenton watched him. The eyes so like his own were black with dread and awe, yet filled with will and purpose, indomitable. The mouth was set, the lips white, and all the priest's body Kenton sensed a tremor, a shuddering, deep as the priest's soul. Whether real or but phantoms, he knew the terrors of this place were realities to the priest. With a thrill of ungrudging admiration, he paid tribute to the courage that dared those terrors, while masquerading in sacrilegious semblance of the god to whom the priest was traitor, and whose greater betrayal was the purpose of his pilgrimage. The priest of Bel passed, and Kenton, waiting until he was half hidden in the shining mists, slipped through the curtains, followed him. Now Kenton heard a voice, a still voice, passionless as that which had bidden him arise from his bed of stone. And like that voice, neither was it the place wherein he trod, nor within him. It was as though borne to him out of the farthest flung space. The voice of Nebu, god of wisdom. Listening, he felt himself not one man, but three. A single-purposed Kenton, who followed the priest and would follow him through hell, so he led to Sharane. A Kenton who, tied by some inexplicable link to the mind of the priest, felt and saw and heard, suffered and feared even as he, and a Kenton who hearkened to the words of Nebu as coldly, as dispassionately as they were uttered, watched as coldly, as detachedly, all they pictured. The house of sin, the voice rang, chief of the gods, Nannar, begetter of gods and men, lord of the moon, lord of the brilliant crescent, great of horns, Nannar, perfect of form, decreer of destiny, self-created, whose house is the first of the zones and whose color is silver. He passes through the house of sin. He goes by the altars of Chalcedon and of Sard, which are set with the great moonstone and with rock crystals, the altars where burn the white flames from which Sin the fashioner created Ishtar. He sees the pale and shining serpents of Nannar writhe toward him, and from the silver mists that veil the crescented horns of Sin, he sees the winged white scorpions dart upon him. He hears the sound of the tramping of myriads of feet, the feet of all the men to be born beneath the moon, and he hears the sound of the sobbing of myriads of women, the sobbing of all the women to be born and to bear. He hears the clamor of the uncreate, and he passes. For lo, not the begetter of gods, nor the awe of him may stand before man's desire. So the voice rang, and was silent. And Kenton saw all these things, saw the shimmering white serpents writhe through the silver mist, and strike at the priest, saw the winged scorpions dart upon him, visioned within the mist a vast and awful shape upon whose clouded brows the crescent of the moon was bound. In his own ears he heard the tramping of armies of the unborn, the sobbing of worlds of women yet unborn, the clamor of the uncreate. Saw and heard, even he knew, as did the priest of Bel, and unshaken followed. The golden helm flashed high above him. Kenton paused at the base of a winding stairway, whose broad steps circled upward, changing as they arose from pallid silver to glowing orange. He waited until the priest, never hastening, never looking back, had ascended. He passed into the place to which the stairway led, slipped after him. He looked into a temple filled with crocus light, even as that through which he had just come had been filled with webs of moonbeams. 100 paces away marched the priest, and as Kenton moved on, the still voice resumed its whispering. The house of Shamash, offspring of the moon, god of the day-dweller in the house of luster, banisher of darkness, king of judgment, judge of mankind, on whose head resteth the crown with the high horns, in whose hands are life and death, who cleanseth man with his hands like a tablet of burnished copper, whose house is the second of the zones, and whose color is orange. He passes through the house of Shamash. Here are the altars of opal set with diamonds, and the altars of gold set with amber and the yellow sunstones. Upon the altars of Shamash burn sandalwood and cardamom and verbena. He goes by the altars of opal and of gold, and he goes by the birds of Shamash, whose heads are wheels of flame, and who guard the wheel that turns within the house of Shamash, and is a potter's wheel, upon which all the souls of men are shaped. He hears the noise of myriads of voices, the wailing of those who have been judged, and the shouting of those who have been judged. And he passes. For lo, not the king of judgment nor the fear of him may stand before man's desire. Again Kenton saw and heard all these things, and following the priest came to a second stairway whose steps merged from glowing orange into ebon black. And still following he stood, at last, in a great hall of gloom, the name of whose dread master he knew even before the still voice came murmuring to him out of hidden secret space. The house of Nergal, the mighty one of the great dwelling place, king of the dead, he who scattereth the pestilence, he who ruleth over the lost, the dark one without horns, whose house is the third of the zones and whose color is black. He passes through the house of Nergal. He goes by Nergal's altars of jet and of bloodstone. He goes by the red fires of civet and of bergamot that burn thereon. He goes by the altars of Nergal and the lions that guard them, and the black lions, whose eyes are as rubies and whose claws are blood red, the red lions whose claws are as black iron and whose eyes are as jet. And he passes the sable vultures of Nergal, whose eyes are as carbuncles and whose heads are the fleshless heads of women. He hears the whimpering of the people of the great dwelling place, and he tastes the ashes of their passion. And he passes. For lo, not the Lord of the dead nor the dread of him may swerve man from his desire. Now the steps of the stairway by which Kenton ascended from the house of Nergal faded from ebon into crimson, and fiery, wrathful scarlet was the light that filled the place in which he stood, watching the priest of Bel go steadily on. "The house of Ninib," whispered the voice, "Lord of spears, Lord of the battle, master of the shields, master of the hearts of warriors, ruler of the strife, destroyer of opposition, breaker of the lock, the smiter, whose color is scarlet, whose house is the fourth of the zones. Of shields and of spears upbuilded the altars of Ninib, and their fires are fed with the blood of men and the tears of women. And upon the altars of Nimid burned the gates of fallen cities and the hearts of conquered kings. He goes by the altars of Ninib. He sees threaten him the crimson fangs of the boars of Ninib, whose heads are wreathed with the right hands of warriors, the crimson tusks of the elephants of Ninib, whose feet are ankleted with the skulls of kings, and the crimson tongues of the snakes of Ninib, which lick up the cities. He hears the clashing of spears, the smiting of swords, the falling of walls, the crying of the conquered, and he passes. For lo, since ever man was, the altars of Ninib have been fed with the fruits of man's desire. Upon the fourth stairway he set his feet, ascended steps that ran from the vermilion of licking flame to the clear, serene blue of untroubled skies, stood within a chamber all filled with calm, azure light. Closer now seemed the voice. "The house of Nebu, Lord of wisdom, bearer of the staff, mighty one of the waters, Lord of the fields who openeth up the subterranean streams, the proclaimer, he who openeth the ears of understanding, whose color is blue, and whose house is the fifth of the zones. The altars of Nebu are of blue sapphire and of emerald, and from them shine clear amethysts. The flames that burn on the altars of Nebu are blue fires in whose light only the truth has shadows, and the flames of Nebu are cold flames, nor is there any scent over his altars. He passes by the altars of sapphire and of emerald, and their cold fires. He passes the fishes of Nebu, which have women's breasts but silent mouths. He passes the seeing eyes of Nebu, which look forth from behind his altars, and he touches not the staff of Nebu, which holdeth up with wisdom the feet. Yea, he passes. For lo, when did wisdom stand before man's desire? Up from the blue of Nebu's house went the priest, and behind him on a stairway that merged from sapphire into rosy pearl and ivory climbed Kenton. Little, caressing tendrils of incense reached out to him as he went, and all about him beat little languorous, linked notes of amorous sound, coaxing, calling, infinitely alluring, perilously sweet. Slowly, slowly Kenton followed him, listening to the voice, yet half heeding it, half forgetful of his quest, struggling with the vast desire to heed the calling, linked in amorous music, surrender to the spirit of this ensorcelled chamber. Go no further. Forget Sharane. "The house of Ishtar," came the voice, "mother of the gods and of men, the great goddess, lady of the morning and of the evening, full-bosomed, the producer, she who hearkeneth to petition, the mighty weapon of the gods, she who slayed and she who created love. And the house of Ishtar is the sixth of the zones." He passes through the house of Ishtar. Of white marble and of rose coral are her altars, and the white marble is streaked with blue like a woman's breast. Upon her altars burn ever myrrh and frankincense, attar and ambergris, and the altars of Ishtar are set with pearls both white and rose, with hyacinths and with turquoise and with beryls. He goes by the altars of Ishtar, and like the pink palms of maidens desirous, the rose wreaths of the incense steal toward him. The white doves of Ishtar beat their wings about his eyes. He hears the sound of the meeting of lips, the throbbing of hearts, the sighs of women, and the tread of white feet. Yet he passes. For lo, one ever did love stand before man's desire. From that chamber of amorous witcheries, the stairway climbed, reluctant, shifting from its rosy pearls of flaming, flashing gold. And scaling it, he stood within another vast place, radiant as though it were the heart of the sun. Half blinded by the brilliancy, straining his eyes for the priest he saw merged and almost invisible in the golden light. Faster and faster the priest moved onward, as though all his terrors were concentrated, crowding upon his hurrying heels. "The house of Bel," rang the voice. "Merritt, ruler of the four regions, lord of the lands, child of the day, bull-necked, elephant-thewed, mighty one, conqueror of Tiamat, lord of the Igili, king of heavens and of earth, bringer of things to completeness, lover of Ishtar. Bel Merodach, whose house is the seventh of the zones, and whose color is golden." Swiftly he passes through the house of Bel. The altars of Bel are of gold and rayed like the sun. On them burn the golden fires of the summer lightnings, and the smoke of the incense hangs over them like the clouds of the thunderstorm. The cherubs whose bodies are lions and whose heads are eagle heads, and the cherubs whose bodies are bulls and whose heads are the heads of men, guard the golden altars of Bel, and both are winged with mighty wings. And the altars of Bel are reared upon thews of elephants, and are held upon the necks of bulls and the paws of lions. He goes by them. He sees the fires of the lightning sink and the altars shake. In his ears is the sound of worlds crushed by the fist of Bel, of worlds falling beneath the feet of Bel, of worlds breaking beneath the smiting of Bel. Yet he passes, for lo, not even the might of God may crush the desire of man. The voice ceased. It seemed to retreat to those far regions whence it had come. In its withdrawal, Kenton sensed finality, knew it would sound no more for him there, that now he was thrown on his own wit and strength, must captain his own way henceforward. Out from one side of the house of Bel jutted a squared buttress, perpendicular, 50 feet or more wide. It thrust itself into this temple, within a temple, like the gigantic pier of a bridge. Its top was hidden in the strange shining mists. Down its smooth facade darted a broad and angled streak of gold that Kenton for an instant took to be a colossal ornament, a symboling of the darting lightning bolt of Bel. Closer he came to it, following the priest, and now he saw that the golden streak was no ornament. It was a stairway, fashioned to represent the leaping levin, but a stairway. A steep stairway of sharply angled flights that, clinging to the mighty buttress wall, climbed from the floor of the house of Bel up to what? At the foot, the priest of Bel faltered. For the first time he looked behind him, seemed half moved to retreat. Then, with the same despairing gesture of defiance with which he had turned from the altar, he began to creep cautiously, silently up the angled stairs. And Kenton, waiting again until he was but a shadow in the shining mists, followed. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30, The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. The Waking of Sharane. The tempest had struck. Kenton, climbing, heard thunderings like the clashing of armored shields, clanging of countless cymbals, tintamari of millions of gongs of brass. Ever louder grew the clangor as he ascended. With it mingled now the diapason of mighty winds, staccato of cataracts of rain. The stairway climbed the sheer wall of the buttress, as a vine a tower. It was not wide. 3 men might march abreast up it, no more. Up it went dizzily, 5 sharp-angled flights of 40 steps, 4 lesser-angled flights of 15 steps. He trod before he reached its top. Guarding the outer edge was only a thick rope of twisted gold, supported by pillars 5 feet apart. So high was it that when Kenton neared its end and looked down, he saw Belle's house only as a place of golden mists, as though he looked from some high mountain ledge upon a valley whose cloudy coverlet had just been touched by rays of morning sun. The clinging stairway's last step was a slab some 10 feet long and 6 feet wide. Upon it a doorway opened, a narrow arched portal barely wide enough for 2 men to pass within, it side by side. The doorway looked out, over the little platform, into the misty space of the inner temple. The hidden chamber into which it led rested upon the head of the gigantic buttress. What a place to guard, thought Kenton. 1 man might hold that stair and against hundreds. The doorway was closed by a single fold of golden curtains, as heavy and metallic as those which had covered the portal of the moon god's silver house. Involuntarily he shrank back from parting them, remembering what the parting of those argent hangings had revealed to him. He mastered that fear, drew a corner of them aside. He looked into a quadrangular chamber, perhaps 30 feet square, filled with the dancing peacock plumes of the lightnings. He knew it for his goal. Belle's place of pleasance, where his love waited, fettered by dream. He glimpsed the priest crouched against the further wall, wrapped upon a white-veiled woman standing, arms stretched wide, beside a deep window close to the chamber's right-hand corner. The window was closed by 1 wide, clear crystal pane, on which the rain beat and the wind lashed. With thousands of brushes dipped in little irised flame, the lightnings limned the loves of Belle, broidered on hangings on the walls. In the chamber were a table and 2 stools of gold, a massive ivoried wooden couch. Beside the couch was a wide-bellied brazier and a censer shaped like a great hourglass. From the brazier arose a tall yellow flame. Upon the table were small cakes, saffron-colored, in plates of yellow amber and golden flagons filled with wine. Around the walls were 20 little lamps, and under each lamp a ewer filled with the fragrant oil for their filling. Kenton waited, motionless. Danger was gathering below him, like a storm cloud with planets stirring it in wizard's cauldron. Perforce he waited, knowing that he must fathom this stream of Sharane's, must measure the fantasy in which she moved, mind asleep before he could awaken her. The blue priest had so told him. To him came her voice, sweet and dreaming. Who has seen the beatings of his wings? Who has heard the tramplings of his feet like the sound of many chariots setting forth for battle? What woman has looked into the brightness of his eyes? There was a searing flash, a clashing of thunder. Within the chamber itself, it seemed. When his own sight had cleared, he saw Sharane, hands over eyes, groping from the window. And in front of the window stood a shape, looming gigantic against the flickering radiance, and-helmed and buckled all in blazing gold. A godlike shape. Bel Merodach himself, who had leaped there from his steeds of storm, and still streaming with his lightnings. So Kenton for one odd instant thought, then knew that shape to be the priest of Bel in the stolen garments of his god. The white figure, that was Sharane. Slowly drew hands from eyes, slowly let them fall. Eyes upon that shining form. Half she dropped to her knees and raised herself proudly. She searched the partly hidden face with her wide, green, dreaming eyes. Bell, she whispered in again. Lord Bell. The priest spoke. O beautiful one, for whom await you? She answered, For whom but thee, Lord of the Lightnings? But why wait you me? The priest asked, nor took step toward her. Kenton, poised to leap and strike, drew back at the question. What was in the mind of the priest of Bel that he thus temporized? Sharane spoke, perplexed, half shamed. This is thy house, Bel. Should there not be a woman here to await thee? I am a king's daughter, and I have long awaited thee. The priest said, You are fair. His eyes burned upon her. Yes, many men must have found you fair, yet I am a god. I was fairest among the princesses of Babylon. Who but the fairest should wait for thee at thy house? I am fairest of all. So Sharane, all tranced passion. When again the priest spoke, his bitterness made Kenton once more wonder what it was within his mind that forced him to these questionings, held him back from that possession of Sharane, for which he had defied his god. Princess, how has it been with these men who thought you fair? Say, did not your beauty slay them like swift, sweet poison? Have I thought of men, she asked tremulously. He answered sternly, Yet many men must have thought of you, king's daughter. And poison, be it swift and sweet, must still be a pain. I am a god, yet I know that. There was a silence. Abruptly he asked, How have you awaited me? She said, I have kept the lamps filled with oil. I have prepared cakes for thee and set out the wine. I have been handmaiden to thee. The priest said, Many women have done all this. 4 men, king's daughter, I am a god. She murmured, I am most beautiful. The princes and the kings have desired me. See, O great one. The iris lightnings caressed the silver wonder of her body, hardly hidden in the nests of her red gold hair, unbound and falling free. The priest leaped from the window. Kenton, mad with jealousy that another should behold that white beauty, darted through the curtains to strike him down. Halfway he stopped short, understanding, even pity for the priest of Bel holding him back. For the priest's soul stood forth naked before his inner sight, and that soul was even as his own would have been, he knew, had he been priest, and the priest been Kenton. No, cried Bel's priest, and tore the golden helm of his god from his head, hurled sword away, ripped off buckler and cloak. No, not one kiss for Bel, not one heartbeat for Bel. What, shall I pander for Bel? No, it is the man you shall kiss. It is a man's heart that shall beat against yours. Mine. No god shall have you. He caught her in his arms, set burning lips to hers. Kenton was upon him. He thrust an arm under the priest's chin, bent back the head until the neck cracked. The priest's eyes glared up into his. His hands left Sharane and battered up at Kenton's face. He twisted to break the latter's grip. Then his body became limp. Awe and terror visibly swept away his blind rage. For now the priest's consciousness had taken in Kenton's face, saw it as his own face looking down upon him and promising him death. The god he had defied, betrayed, had struck. Kenton read his thoughts as accurately as though they had been spoken. He shifted grip, half lifted, half swung the priest high above the floor and hurled him against a wall. He struck, crashed down, lay there twitching. Sharane crouched, veils caught up, held fast to her by rigid hands, on the edge of the ivoried couch. She stared at him piteously. Her wide eyes clung to his, bewildered. Deep within her, he sensed grapple of awakening will, against the webs of dream. One great throb of love and pity for her pulsed through him. In it, no passion. To him at that moment she was no more than child, bewildered, forsaken, piteous. "Sharane," he whispered and took her in his arms. "Sharane, beloved, it is I, John Kenton, beloved, awaken." He kissed her on the cold lips, the frightened eyes. "John Kenton," she murmured, "John Kenton." And then so low he could barely hear. "Ah, yes, I remember. John Kenton. He was lord of me, ages ago." "Wake, Sharane," cried Kenton, and again his lips met and clung to hers, and now her lips warmed and clung to his. "John Kenton," she whispered, "dear lord of me." She drew back, thrust into his arms fingers that clutched like 10 slow-closing fingers of steel. In her eyes he saw the dream breaking as break the last storm clouds before the sun. In her eyes the dream lightened and darkened. Lightened, became but cloudy, racing wisps. "Beloved," cried Sharane, and all awake, freed from all dream, threw arms around his neck, pressed lips all alive to his. "Beloved one, John Kenton." "Sharane, Sharane," he whispered, the veils of her hair covering him, as she drew his face to her cheeks, her throat, her breast. "Oh, where have you been, John Kenton?" she sobbed. "What have they done to me, John Kenton? And where is the ship? And where have they taken me? Yet what does it matter since you are with me?" "Sharane, Sharane, beloved," was all he could say, over and over again, his mouth on hers. Hands gripped his throat, strong hands, shutting off his breath. Choking, he glared up into the mad eyes of the priest of Bel. Even as the priest had glared into his when it had been Kenton's hands at his throat. Broken, Kenton had thought him, and broken he had not been. He had recovered, crept up behind him. "Got me," groaned Kenton to himself. "Got me. Hell, why didn't I kill him? Got me? Not now." He threw right leg behind the priest, hurled himself back against the priest with all his strength. The priest fell, dragging Kenton with him. His hands relaxed just enough to let Kenton thrust one of his own between the strangling fingers and his throat. Then he twisted, broke the grip, lay with legs locked in the priest's, pinning him down. Like a snake, the priest slid from under him, threw him aside, sprang to his feet. Quick as he, Kenton leaped up. Before he could draw a sword, the priest of Bel was upon him again. One arm around him, prisoning his right arm, the other with elbow fending off Kenton's left and tearing at his throat. Far below, through the drumming of the blood in his ears, Kenton heard one faint throb of another drum, awakening, summoning, menacing, as though it had been a beat of a Zagreat's own heart, alarmed and angry. And far below Gigi, swinging with long ape-like arms from the grapnel he has cast over the outer stairway's edge, hears it too. Swarms with frantic speed up the rope, and with the same tremendous speed follow him first Zubran, and close behind him the Viking. "Alarm," mutters Sigurd, and draws them under the protection of the skirting wall, that they may hear him. Pray Thor that the sentinels have not heard. Swift now. Hugging the wall, the three climb up and around the silver terrace of Sin, the moon god. The lightnings have almost ceased, but the rain sweeps down in stinging sheets and the winds roar, rocking the temple. The stairway is rushing torrent half knee-deep. Blackness of the great storm shrouds them. Breasting wind and rain, stemming the torrent, they climb, the three. About Bel's high bower, reeled Kenton and the priest, locked tight in each other's arms, each struggling to break the other's hold, then throttle, tear, slay. Around them circles Sharane, the priest's stolen sword in hand, panting, seeking opening to strike, finding none. So close were the two locked, So swiftly did back of priest, back of lover, swerve before her. Shalamoo, Shalamoo. The dancer of bells stood at the golden curtains, whipped up through the secret shrines by love, remorse, despair. White-faced, trembling, she clung to those curtains. Shalamoo, shrilled the dancer. They come for you. The priest of Nergal leads. The priest's back was toward her, Kenton facing her. The priest's head was bent forward, straining to sink teeth in his neck, tear out the arteries, deaf, blind to all but the lust to kill. His ears were closed to Narada. And Narada, seeing Kenton's face in the fitful light of the brazier, thought it that of the man she loved. Before Sharane could move, she had sped across the room. She drove her dagger to the hilt in the back of the priest of Bel. Huddled for shelter in an alcove, cut for them in the ziggurat's wall, the sentinels of the silver zone feel arms thrust out of the storm. 2 fall with necks snapped by Gigi's talons. 2 fall under swift thrust of Sigurd's sword. 2 drop beneath the scimitar of the Persian. In that niche now lie only 6 dead men. Swift, swift Sigurd leads the way past the silver zone. They round the orange zone of Shamash, the sun god. 3 deaths reach out of the void, and the sentinels of the orange zone lie dead behind the hurrying feet of the 3. They sense a deeper darkness at their left, the black walls of the zone of Nergal, god of the dead. Swift, swift! The priest of Bel slid from Kenton's opening arms. He dropped to his knees. He fell backward, dying eyes staring into those of the dancer. Narada, he gasped, through bloody froth. Narada, you... The froth turned to a red stream. The priest of Bel was dead. One look at the dancer gave Kenton one scorching look, and knew what she had done. Shalamoo, she wailed, and wailing still flew at Kenton, dagger poised to strike. Before he could draw a sword, before he could raise hands to beat her off, even before he could fall back, she was upon him. Down swept the blade, straight for his heart. He felt the bite of its point. The point swerved, ripped down through the skin over his ribs. In that same instant, Sharane had sprung, had caught the dancer's hand, had wrested the dagger from it and driven it deep into Narada's breast. Like a young tree at the axe's last blow, the dancer stood for a heartbeat, shuddering, then down she dropped, prone upon the priest. She moaned, and with the last flare of life, flung arms around his head, laid lips to his. Dead lips now on lips of the dead. They stared at each other, Sharane with red blood in hand and Kenton with red runes on chest, written by that blade. They stared down at the priest of Bel and at Bel's dancer. There was pity in Kenton's eyes. There was no pity in Sharane's. She would have killed you, she whispered, and again. She would have killed you. A blinding flash filled the chamber, fast on its heels, chaotic shatterings. The lightnings had begun afresh. Kenton ran to the doorway, parted the curtains, listened. Below him the house of Bel seemed to lie tranquil in its misty, aureate glow. He heard nothing, and yet, had there been sound, could he have heard it in the tumult of the thunderings? He saw nothing, heard nothing, and yet... He sensed that danger was close, torment and death stealing up to them. Perhaps even now creeping up the zigzags of those steps whose base was hidden. Torment and death for Sharane and for him, creeping, stealing ever closer. He ran back to the window. Gigi, Sigurd, Zubran, where were they? Had they failed to make the outer stairway? Had they too been caught? Or were they marching up to him, cutting their way through the sentries? Were close? Could they not meet them, Sharane and he? The window was deep, 3 feet of masonry stretched between the inner sill and the yard wide. Single pane that closed it. He drew himself in, saw that the pane was thick, transparent crystal held by a circle of metal. It was kept shut by levers thrust into niches within the casement of stone. One by one he lifted the levers. Suddenly the window flew open. He was half pushed, half washed back into the chamber by the wind and rain volleying through. He battled forward against them, looked down over the outer sill. The steps of the great stairway were full 40 feet below him. Between the window and the steps fell an almost perpendicular wall, streaming with storm, impossible to descend, equally as impossible to be scaled. He peered on each side and above him. The Bower of Bel was a huge cube set on the top of the conical temple. The window through which he peered was close to the edge of a side of this cube. Not more than a yard from his right hand was a corner of that cube. But 20 feet to his left, its black wall stretched. Its top was 20 feet above him. He felt Sharane beside him, knew that she was trying to tell him something, could not hear her in the shrieking of the tempest. Set within the breast of a lightning flare, the sentinels of Nergal see 3 silhouettes of doom spring out of the blackness. Swords bite among them. One shrieks and tries to flee. His cry is torn to tatters by the roaring gale. He is caught by long arms. Long talons snap his neck. He goes whirling with the wind over the stairway's wall. Now the red zone sentries are dead within their niche. Now the 3 pass by the blue zone of Nebu, the god of wisdom, and find no guards to challenge them, nor are there sentries before Ishtar's White House, and none outside the golden zone of Bel. And here the curving stairway abruptly ends. Now they take counsel there, the 3, scanning the smooth masonry rising above them without break. A wail that not even the tempest can still shudders past them. The heartbroken, mad wailing of Bel's dance ere she hurls herself on Kenton. That cry came from there. The Sigurd, pointing outward where the window of Bel's bower, hidden to them, faces the lightnings, and now they see that the wall of the great stairway merges into the side of the topping structure, close to its corner. But the wall slope is such that none may stand upon it to peer round that corner, nor can one standing on the highest step see round that corner's edge. "Use your long arms, Gigi," grunts the Viking. "Stand close as you can to stair wall end. Here, grip me by my knees and thrust me outward. My back is strong, and I can twist round that corner." Gigi takes him by the knees, lifts him, throws one muscle-gnarled dwarf leg over the wall for balance, thrusts Sigurd out with mighty arms, and Sigurd, held against the side by the wind like a leaf, looks straight into the face of Kenton, little more than a foot from him. "Wait there," howls the Viking, and signals Gigi with a kick of the foot to draw him back. "The wolf," he tells them, "there, in a window so close he can draw me through to him. Lift me again, Gigi. When I kick, let me go. Then let Zivran follow by the same road. Stay you here, Gigi, for without you to draw us back there will be no return. Stay where you are with arms outstretched, ready to bear into you whatever you touch. Quick now." Again he is swung outward. His wrists are caught in Kenton's grip. Gigi loosens him. For an instant he swings in space and then is drawn up to the sill and over. "Zubran comes," he shouts to Kenton, and runs to the doorway where Sharane stands, sword in hand. And now the Persian, held by Gigi's long arms, swings round the bower's edge, is caught by Kenton, stands beside him. Fanned by the gale, rushing through the open window, the brazier flamed like a torch. The heavy golden curtains were bellying. The little lights along the wall all blown out. The Persian leaned back, found the levers, and snapped enough of them down to hold the window shut. He gave Kenton's hand one swift clasp, looked curiously at the bodies of priest and dancer. "Gigi," cried Kenton, "is he safe there? Did none follow you?" None, answered the Persian grimly. Or if they did, their hands are too shadowy to hold swords, Wolf. Gigi is safe enough. He waits to swing us to him as we crawl from the window. All except one of us, he added under his breath. Kenton, thoughts on Gigi, the way to freedom, did not hear that last odd phrase. He leaped to the door on one side of which stood watchful Sharane, on the other tense Sigurd. He drew her to him in fierce caress, loosed her, and peered through the curtains. Far below him were dull gleamings, reflections from armored caps and coats of mail, glints of swords, a quarter of the way up the angled stair that led from Bell's house to his bower. They were soldiers, moving slowly, cautiously, silently, creeping to surprise, as they thought, Bell's priest in dreaming Sharane's arms. There was time, minutes still, for him to put in action the plan swift-born within his brain. He set the golden helm of Bell on his head, fastened buckler, threw the scarlet-threaded mantle over his shoulder. Sigurd, he whispered, Zubrin. Those who come must believe that here are only Sharane and that man who lies there. Else, before we could pass the middle terrace, they will have given the alarm. Soldiers will be pouring up the outer stairway, and we are done. Therefore, when those below are close upon the door, Sharane and I will leap out on them with swords. They will not try to slay us, only capture us. They will be confused, fall back, then take Sharane swiftly and pass her out to Gigi. We will follow. A swift glance had passed between the Persian and Sigurd, laden with meaning. The first part of the plan is good, Wolf, interrupted the Persian smoothly, but not the last. Nay, one must remain here until the others are safely away from the temple. Else, when they have entered here, quickly will the black priest's wit tell him what has happened, and there will be a ring around the place through which a regiment could not break. Nay, one must remain, stay behind for a time, Wolf. I will stay, said Kenton. Beloved, whispered Sharane, you go with me or I go not at all. Sharane, began Kenton. Dear lord of mine, she stayed him, serenely. Do you think that ever again I will let you go from me? Be parted from you? Never, in life or death, never. Nay, Wolf, I stay, said the Persian. Why, listen, Sharane will not go without you, so that bars you. Since go, she must. Gigi cannot well remain, since he cannot get here to remain. That, you will admit, good, and Sigurd must go to show us the road back, since none but him know it. Who is left? Zubrin. The gods have spoken. Their argument is unanswerable. But how will you get away? How find us? Groaned Kenton. You say yourself that without Gigi's help, you cannot swing from the window. No, answered Zubrin, but I can make me a rope out of these bed coverings and the hangings. I can slip down that rope to the steps I glimpsed beneath me, and one may escape where 5 could not. I remember the road through the city and that road we took when we came out of the trees. Wait you there for me. They're very close, John Kenton, called Sharane softly. Kenton ran to the doorway. A dozen steps below crept the soldiers, a score of them, treading noiselessly 2 by 2, small shields ready, swords in hands. Behind them a little knot of priests, yellow-robed and black-robed, and among the black robes, Calaneth. Crouched against the wall at Sharane's right was Sigurd, hidden but set for swift guarding of her. The Persian dropped at Kenton's right, pressed close to the wall where those who came forward might not see him. Cover the brazier, whispered Kenton. Put it out. Best have no light behind us. The Persian took it, but he did not touch the cover that would have killed the fires within. Instead, he shook it, covered the flame with embers, set it in a corner where the faint glow of the coals could be seen. The feet of the first pair of soldiers were almost on the top step. Their hands reached out to draw aside the coverings of the narrow door. "Now," breathed Kenton to Sharane. Took fleet, proud note of her fearlessness. He tore the curtains down. They stood, she in her white robes of priestess, he in the golden panoply of the god, confronting the soldiers, and they, paralyzed by that unexpected apparition, halted like automatons, gaped at the twain. Before they could recover from surprise, Sharane's blade flashed. Kenton's sword struck like a bolt of thin blue lightning. Down went the two leaders. Ere the man he had slain could fall, Kenton had snatched the shield from his arm, passed it to Sharane, slashed down again at the warriors behind. "For Ishtar," he heard Sharane cry, and saw her sword bite deep. "The woman, the priest, take them," came the roar of Clanneth. Down bent Kenton, raised a fallen soldier in his arms and hurled him straight into the pack. The body flailed down, as though alive. Down they went before it, rolling, cursing, down the flight they fell, soldiers and priests. Some they were who crashed into the slender railing, tore gaps in it, dropped and plunged like plummets through the mist to be broken on the floor of Belle's house so far below. Back Kenton leaped, caught Sharane in his arms, pressed lips brutally, possessingly on hers, tossed her to Sigurd. "To the window," he bade. "Give it to Gigi." He darted before them, opened the pane. Far away now the lightnings glimmered. Blackness had given way to darkest twilight. The rain still hissed in sheets driven by the howling wind. In that dark twilight he saw the dripping arms of Gigi, stretched out round the bower's corner. He dropped back. The Viking slid past him, Sharane in his grip. For an instant she hung in air. She was caught by Gigi. She was drawn from sight. There came a shouting from the inner stairway. The soldiers had rallied, were rushing up. Kenton saw Sigurd and the Persian lifting the heavy couch, throwing off its coverings, tilting it. They rocked it to the doorway, shoved it through, sent it crashing down the steps. Came another shouting, cries of agony, groaning. The bed had swept the men before it as a well-hurled ball does the wooden pins. It had swept and crushed them, had swung across the stairway at turn of the highest lesser-angled ledge, and had jammed there against the golden roped rail, a barricade. "Go, Sigurd," cried Kenton. "Wait first by the woods. I fight here with Sirbran." The Persian looked at him, a light of affection such as Kenton had never before seen there, softening the agate eyes. He nodded to Sigurd. As though it had been a signal prearranged, the Viking's arms were instantly around Kenton. Strong as he had grown, he could not break their grip, and Sirbran whisked the golden helm of Bell from his head and set it on his own, tore loose the golden buckler, dropped his own coat of mail and fastened it in its place, took the scarlet-threaded mantle of the god and wrapped it half round his mouth, hiding his beard. Then Kenton was carried like a struggling child to the window by the Viking, was thrust out of it, was caught by Gigi, and dropped beside the weeping Sharane. The Viking turned and folded the Persian in his arms. "No waiting, Northman. No sentiment now." Sirbran snapped, breaking away. "There can be no escape for me. You know that, Sigurd. The rope. Words to satisfy the wolf. I love him. The rope. Why, they would slide down it behind me like snakes. Am I trembling here to lead the hounds to the hiding places of my kind? Not I. Now go, Sigurd, and when you have gotten clear of the city, tell them, and quickly as you can, make for the ship." Said the Viking solemn, "Shield maidens are close. Odin takes the hero, no matter what his race. You sup with Odin, All-Father, in Valhalla soon, Persian. May he have better cooked dishes then than I have ever tasted," laughed the Persian. "Out of the window, Norseman." And Sirbran, holding his knees, The Viking crawled out, was caught by Gigi, then down the terraces, Sigurd leading, Sharane covered by Gigi's great cloak. Kenton, cursing still, flew the four of them. The Persian did not close the window after them. Let the wind stream through. He swaggered back through Bel's bower. By all the divas, swore Zubran, never have I known such feeling of freedom as now. Lo, I am all alone, the last man in the world. None can help me, none can counsel me, none weary me. Life is simple at last. All there is to it is for me to slay until I am slain. By Ormuzd, how my spirit stands on tiptoe. He peered around the doorway. Never has that couch given men such trouble to mount. He chuckled as he watched the soldiers below working to clear away the barrier. Turning, he piled in a heap the silken clothes torn from the bed. He ripped down wall hangings and with them built the pile higher. One by one he took the lamps and emptied them on the pyre. The oil in the ewers beneath them he poured upon it. That old world of mine, mused the Persian as he worked, how it wearied me. And if the wolf's tale be true, the world that replaced it would weary me even more. And this world has well wearied me, by the flame of sacrifice, but it has. He stooped, picked up the body of the priest of Bel, carried it to the window. It will puzzle the black priest more to find you without them than to find you here. He grinned and slid him out. He walked and stood over the dancer. So beautiful, whispered the Persian, and touched her lips, her breast. I wonder how you died, and why. It must have been amusing, that. I had no time to ask the wolf. Well, you shall sleep with me, and perhaps when we both awaken, if we do, you shall tell me. He laid the body of the dancer on the oil-soaked pile. He took the smoking brazier and placed it close beside her. There came a roaring from below, a trampling of feet on the steps. Up streamed the soldiers, stronger now by scores. An instant the Persian showed himself, mantle held before his face. The priest, they cried, and Clannis' voice over all. Slay him! The Persian stepped back to the cover of the wall, smiling. He picked up the shield Sharane had dropped. Through the narrow doorway a soldier leaped, a second close on his heels. The scimitar hissed twice, struck twice, swift as swiftest snake. The stricken men fell under the feet of those pressing on from behind, tripping them, confusing them, and now up and down, parrying, thrusting, slashing through the Persian's keen edge until his red bath dyed his arm to shoulder. They should be off the outer wall by now and well away, mused Zubran. He flexed the weary muscles of his arm, peered out at the soldiers clustered on the landing below in angry argument with the priests, and stretching down from that nod as far as he could see, the steps glittered with other warriors, packed close. They mustered. They rushed up the steps like a great serpent. They pushed through the door, clambering over the pile of the dead. The red drip of the scimitar became a steady, running rivulet. An agony bit deep into his side above the hip. A falling swordsman had raised himself on knees, thrust blade upward, and the Persian knew his wound was mortal. He cut down at the grinning face, leaped upon the dead, cleared the doorway with rain of stroke. He leaped back, seized the table. Holding it before him, he sprang upon the dead, thrust it like a battering ram into the faces of those rising behind them. Again they rolled back, encumbered by their own numbers, pitched off the railless edge and hurtled down through the mists, clutching at empty air. For 20 steps the stairway was clear. An arrow whistled. It cut through the twisted mantle around his neck, pierced him where gorget and helm met. He felt the blood pouring down his throat, choking him. The Persian staggered to the silken pile on which lay Narada. He caught a leg of the brazier and overturned its coals upon the oil-soaked cloths. Thin flames arose. Giddiness took him. He dropped to his knees. On his knees he crawled up the pile, its flames roaring now in the wind blast from the window. He crawled up through those fires, fell beside the body of the dancer. "A clean death," smiled the Persian. "At the last, like all men, I go back to the gods of my fathers. A clean death, O fire immortal, take me." As though in answer to that prayer, a high and fragrant flame shot up beside him. It shot up, hovered, then bent over the Persian. The tip of the flame broadened. It became a cup of fire filled with a wine of flames. And into that flaming cup the Persian dipped his face, drank of its wine of fire, breathed in its fire as though it had been incense. His head fell back, unmarred, the dead face smiling. His head dropped upon the soft breast of the dancer. The flames made a canopy over them. They licked them with their little clean red tongues, ate them with their clean crimson teeth. End of chapter 30.
Chapter 31 of The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Michael Broomhill. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. To the Open Sea. Now the four for whose freedom the Persian had died were far away. Safely they had passed the terraces. The dead sentries lay as they had fallen. None had been sent to relieve them. None had found them. But the four heard a humming begin inside the ziggurat, like that of a disturbed and colossal hive. Heard the great drum begin its throbbing and sped faster under cover of the balustrade of stone, down to where the grapnel of Gigi hung. One by one they slipped down its rope and into the sheltering trees. The tempest scourged them, but it shielded them. None were on the wide street to challenge their going. Imaginative lay within its painted houses, hiding from the storm. When the cup of flame had dipped to the Persians' lips, they were well along that other way upon which opened the hidden path back to the ship. When the soldiers had at last mustered courage to swarm the stairs once more, and with the black priest on their heels had poured within the silent bower, they were far beyond the clustered houses, stumbling through the deep mud of the farm side. The Viking at lead, Sharane carried in Gigi's arms, Kenton guarding the rear, and watching, ever watching, for the Persian. And back in that chamber where the Persian's ashes lay mixed with the dancers, the black priest stood, mazed and with something of fear touching his wicked heart, looking upon those ashes, until his wandering gaze caught gleam of the butterflies in Narada's veils that had slipped from her when the Persian had lifted her, caught, too, the trail of blood that led to the open window, and had flowed from the body of the priest of Bel as the Persian had carried him there. And staring out that window, the black priest saw in the livid dusk the crumpled body of Bel's priest, dead, white-faced, raised to his own 40 feet below. The priest? Then whose were the charred bodies in the pyre? Sharane's and Narada's? If not, who had been the man fighting in golden helm and buckler, face hidden in the god's mantle? So swift had been the swordplay, so much had that man been hidden by the soldiers, so much by cover of the wall, that the black priest watching from below had caught few glimpses of him, had taken it for granted that it was Bel's priest. But had it been? Back ran the black priest, kicked savagely at the ashes of the pyre and what still lay among them. Something clanged upon the floor, a broken scimitar. He knew that hilt. Zubran, the Persians. Something glittered at his feet, a buckle, gems undulled by their bath of fire. He knew that too, the buckle of Narada's girdle. Why then these blackened forms were the Persian, the dancer? Sharane had been freed, but how? How? The black priest stood rigid, eyes flaming, face so dreadful that the soldiers shrank back from him, threw themselves against the walls out of his way. Then he plunged howling out of Bel's bower, down the angled stairway, through the secret shrines, on and on until he had reached that cell where he had left Kenton with the 6 archers. Howling, he threw open the door, saw archers and officers still deep in sleep, and Kenton gone. And shrieking curses, rage and baffled cruelty racking him with tortures as fiery as those he had promised Kenton and Sharane. The black priest staggered out of that cell, roaring for men to go forth and search the city for the temple drab and the slave, offering all he owned for them. All, if only they brought the pair back to him alive. Alive! But now the 4 had left the road and had halted in that wood where the hidden path began and where the Persian in his craft had bade them wait for him. And here Sigurd told them of Zubran's sacrifice and why that sacrifice had to be. While Sharane wept and Kenton's throat ached with sorrow, Gigi's beady black eyes grew soft and his tears ran down the furrows of his wrinkles. What's done is done, said Sigurd. He sups by now with Odin and the heroes. Brusquely, he shouldered by them and took the way. Silently they followed. And for a little while, in his grief, Kenton hated his love, walking now before him, since through her he had been dragged from the side of his friend who had given up his life that Kenton might have his love. But hated her not for long. Again he saw her fighting beside him, knew that as gladly as he would, she would have stayed within the chamber, gone unshrinkingly to death beside him and the Persian had she but known, and had he desired it. He strode beside her, took her in remorseful arms. She clung to him. On they went and on, along the hidden way. The rain drenched them, the wind beat them. When storm lightened, they went swiftly. When it darkened, so that the Viking could no longer see the trail, they halted. On and on, beating back to the ship. Now Sharane faltered and fell, nor could she rise again, and the 3, clustering round her, saw that her thin sandals were in rags, and that her slim feet were bare and bleeding, and that for long each step must have been an agony. So Kenton took her in his arms and carried her, and when he tired, Gigi took her, and Gigi was untiring. And at last they came to where the ship lay hid. They held her, and found the warrior maids on watch. To them they gave Sharane, and they carried their mistress into her cabin and ministered to her. The slaves were awake beneath the awning spread to shield them from the rain, and the overseer reported that he had seen nothing, heard nothing but the tempest. Now arose discussion as to whether they should stay hid until that tempest had abated. At last they decided that they would not, that it was better to push out to sea than stay so close to Micaela and Nergal's haunted place. So the chains were unshackled from the trees, the ship drawn out of shelter, her bow warped round and pointed to harbor's mouth. Then up came the hook, down dipped the oars. Slowly the ship gathered speed. She swung out round the point of rocks, and Sigurd at the steering oar shot into the eye of the wind, breasted the roaring combers, and leaped like a racer out into the open ocean. Kenton, utterly spent, dropped where he stood. To him came Gigi, lifted and carried him into the black cabin. Long squatted Gigi beside him, wide awake, though weary as he was, peering here and there with bright eyes, listening, watchful, for it seemed to Gigi that the black cabin was not as it had been when they left it. It seemed to him that it had become darker, that shadows of shadows moved fitfully about the walls, cowered in the corners, and it seemed to Gigi that he heard a whispering, ghosts of whispers, coming and going. And now Kenton moaned and muttered in his deep sleep, gasped as though hands sought his throat. Gigi, pressing paw on Kenton's heart, stilled him. But after a time, the watchful eyes of Gigi dulled. Their lids dropped. His head nodded. In the empty niche where the idol of Nergal had stood above the bloodstone slab of worship, a darkness gathered, a cloudy shape of curdled shadows. The shape darkened. Within it began to form the semblance of a face that brooded upon the sleeping pair, hate-filled, menacing, and gloating. Again, Kenton groaned and fought for breath against nightmare terror, and Gigi threshed out long arms, leaped to his feet, glared about him. Swiftly as it had come, before Gigi's sleep-heavy eyes could open, the shadowy face had vanished. The niche was empty. End of chapter 31.
Chapter 32 of The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Christine Rottger. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. Let the strife end. When Kenton awakened, it was the Viking and not Gigi who lay beside him, stripped and snoring. He must have slept long, for the drenched garments the Ninevite had taken off of him were dry. He put on clout and tunic, slipped feet into sandals, threw over his shoulders a short cloak, and softly opened the door. Blackness and dark twilight had given way to a pallid dusk that turned the sea a sullen gray. The rain had ceased, but all the world of the ship vibrated to the steady roar of a mighty wind pouring over it. Before that wind, the ship was flying, riding like a gull on the crests of giant waves, slipping back as the swells passed, through smoothly onrushing floors of water like liquid slate, rising to fly again upon the crest of the next racing wave. He struggled up to the steersman's place, the spindrift stinging his face like sleet. To one of the rudder oars clung Gigi. At the other were two slaves from the rower's pit. The Ninevite grinned at him, pointed to the compass. He looked and saw that the needle which held constant Sorcerer's Isle pointed straight astern. "Far behind us now is that den," shouted Gigi. "Go below," cried Kenton in a pointed ear, and would have taken the oar from him, but Gigi only laughed, shook his head, and pointed toward the cabin of Sharane. "That is your course," he roared. "Steer it." And buffeting the gale, Kenton came to the door of the rosy cabin, opened it. Sharane lay asleep, cheek cradled on one slim hand, tresses covering her like a silken net of red gold. Two maids, watchful, crouched at her bedside. As though he had called to her, she opened sleepy eyes that as she looked at him grew sweetly languorous. "My own dear lord," whispered Sharane. She sat up, motioned the girls to go, and when they had gone, she held out white arms to him. His own arms were around her. Like a homing bird, she nestled in them, raised red lips to his. "Dear lord of me," whispered Sharane. He heard no more the roaring wind, heard nothing but the whisperings, the sighings of Sharane, forgot all worlds save that which lay within Sharane's tender arms. Long they flew on the tempest's wings. Twice Kenton took Gigi's place at the rudder oars. Twice the Viking relieved him before the great wind died, and they sailed once more on dimpling, sparkling turquoise sea, with a perfumed breeze beating the sail with gentle hands. Began now for those upon the ship a hunted life and a haunted one. Far, far behind them must lie Micaela by now, and yet, On all the four rested clear certainty of pursuit. No fear, no terror, but untroubled knowledge that the ship was a hunted thing, knowledge that unless they could outsail the fleet they knew must be combing these strange seas until they found a safe and secret harbor, there could be but one end for them. Nor did one of them believe deep in his heart that there was such sanctuary. Yet they were happy. Full tide of life beat round Kenton and Sharane. They took their fill of life and love, and Sigurd sang old sagas, and a new one he had made of Zubran the Persian, while he and Gigi beat out huge shields and arrows for the bows. The shields they set around the bulwarks at the ship's bow, and pierced them with slits through which arrows could be winged. Two they fastened on each side of the stern to guard the helmsman. "If we are slain, dear lord, we shall be slain together," Sharane would say, and always, always together. "From now, henceforth, beloved," Kenton would answer her. And Sigurd would chant of battle to come, and shield maidens who would hover over the ship, ready to bear the soul of Sigurd, Trygg's son, to his seat in Valhalla, where Zubran awaited him and Gigi. He sang of place for Kenton there, too, but not when Sharane was in earshot, since Valhalla was no place for women. Hunted and haunted. With the black cabin, the shadows thickened and faded, grew stronger, passed and returned. Something of the dark lord of the dead was there, had retaken season of his deck. Nor Gigi nor the Viking cared to sleep there now. They sought the open deck or the cabin of the warrior maids, and the slaves murmured of shadows that flitted over the black deck and clustered at the rail and stared down upon them. Once, while Sigurd drowsed over the tiller bar, he awakened to find that unaware to all the course of the ship had changed, that the greater needle of the compass pointed straight over the bow to Imaginative, that the ship was moving under the oars back to Sorcerer's Isle. Thereafter they steered 2 by 2, Kenton and Sharane, Gigi and the Viking. Nor was there power within Sharane to banish the shadows. "I will make my bed within the black cabin," she had said. "Once I was a vase for Ishtar, and it may be that something of her still lingers within me to cleanse that den again." But whatever evil it was gathering, there seemed only to grow stronger, banishing sleep from her or making that sleep dreadful. So Kenton forbade her. One isle they made and replenished food and water. There was good harbor there, a hidden cove, and beyond a great forest beckoned them. Here they stopped for a time, talked of drawing the ship up shore, concealing her, then finding place within the woods to build fort, meet there whatever attack might come. The ship drew them back to her. Restless were they all, uneasy on the land, each afraid in secret heart that the other 3 would make up minds to stay, and gay as children they were when the ship drove out again and dipped her bow to the crested waves, while the clean sea wind shouted to them and the isle dropped behind. "A prison," laughed Kenton. "No life that," growled Sigurd. "Hiding in a burrow till the dogs come to dig us out. Now we can see what comes." They met a long ship, a unireme like their own, but of 20 oars. It was a merchant carrier and heavily laden, and it would have fled from them, but the Viking cried that she must not escape to carry tidings to Imaginative. So they pursued and rammed and sunk her, with the chained slaves wailing at the oars. Kenton and Gigi and Sigurd ruthlessly, Sharane white-faced and weeping. They met another, a light vessel no larger than the ship, but this time a warboat, a hunter. They feigned to flee, and it gave chase. And when it was close to them, the Vikings swerved and fell astern, then drove the ship swiftly against the other side, shearing the oars. Those on that vessel fought bravely, yet, hampered by the Black Priest's command to take, but not to slay, they were no match for Gigi's great mace, the Viking's blade, and Kenton's sword of blue lightnings. They fell before them, and the arrows stormed from Sharane and her maids. But they took toll before they were ended. One of the warrior maids died with an arrow through her heart, and both Gigi and Sigurd had their wounds. In this craft they found store of metal for the Vikings' forge. Better still, balls of tow, and oils to soak them in, and flint to light them. Strong shafts to carry the balls when blazing, and oddly shaped crossbows to hurl the shafts with their heads of fire. All these and the metal they took, then sank that vessel with its living and its dead. On sailed the ship and on, while Sigurd hammered out his long shields, and Gigi and Kenton set the crossbows in place by Rosy Cabin and Dark, with tow and oils and flint ready for the firing. And time passed, nor did the tides of life that flowed strong through Kenton of the ship wane ever. Waned not, grew stronger and more strong for him and for Sharane. And then, lying beside his sleeping love, Kenton awoke, or thought that he awakened, and opened his eyes, saw not the cabin, but two faces gazing down upon him from some unknown space, vast faces, vague and nebulous. Their shadowy eyes dwelt upon him. One spoke, and lo, it was the voice that had guided him through the temple's secret shrines, the voice of Nabu. Again Nergal centers his wrath upon the ship, O Ishtar, it said. The strife between him and your sister self once more will trouble gods and men, deepening the shadows in a myriad worlds. Great Mother, only you may end it. My word went forth. The other voice was like the wind rippling over thousands of harp strings. My word went forth, and that sister self of mine, whom of old men have called the wrathful Ishtar, has she not her rights? She has not conquered Nergal, nor has Nergal conquered her. There has been no settlement such as I decreed. How then can my sister's self rest, when the word I spoke in anger has not yet been resolved? And as long as she contends, so long must Nergal also, who too is bound by that word. Yet the flames you kindled within the souls of Zarpanit and Alusar, the flames that were the life of those souls, they did not perish, the still voice whispered. Did they not escape both your wrathful sister and dark Nergal? And why, Ishtar? Was it not because you willed it so? Did you not hide them? What of that word of yours, then? Wise you are, Nabu. There was a touch of anger in the ripple of the harp strings. Now let this man whose eyes we have opened see what that sin my priestess and her lover wreaked of ill when it brought into each other's arms the mother of life and the lord of death. Let this man judge whether my anger were just or not. Let him judge, echoed the voice of Nabu. The vast faces faded. Kenton looked out upon depth, infinity upon infinity of space. Myriads of suns were hived therein, and around them spun myriads upon myriads of worlds. Throughout that limitless space 2 powers moved, mingled yet ever separate. One was a radiance that fructified, that gave birth and life and joy of life. The other was a darkness that destroyed, that drew ever from the radiance that which it had created, stilling them, hiding them in its blackness. Within the radiance was a shape of ineffable light, and Kenton knew that this was the soul of it. In the darkness brooded a deeper shadow, and he knew full well that this was its darker soul. Before him arose the shapes of a man and a woman, and something whispered to him that the woman's name was Zarpanit, and the man's Alusar, the priestess of Ishtar and the priest of Nergal. He saw that in each of their hearts burned a wondrous, clear white flame. He saw the two flames waver, bend towards each other, and as they did so, shining threads of light streamed out from the radiance, linking the priestess with its spirit, while from the black core of the darkness, threads of shadow ran out and coiled about the priest. And as the bending flames touched, suddenly the shining threads and the shadow threads were joined, for an instant were merged. And in that instant all space shuddered, the suns rocked, the worlds reeled, and all the rushing tides of life paused. Sprang in the wake of that shuddering births, monstrous and evil, pestilences and wars, harvests of sorrows. "Behold the sin," rippled the voice of harp strings. "Open his eyes wider," came the still, cold voice. And now Kenton looked into a radiant chamber in which sat, as in judgment, dread powers, veiled in glories of light, all save one who hid in darkness. Before them stood the priest and priestess, and at the side of the priestess, Sharane. He knew he looked upon the gods within the temple of ancient Uruk, upon the gods as they judged between Ishtar and Nergal, and doomed Ishtar's priestess and the Dark Lord's priest. Again he saw the white flames within the hearts of those two, untroubled, serene, indifferent to gods or angry goddess, bending towards each other, unquenchable, immutable, indifferent of wrath of gods or their punishments, immortal. That picture wavered, faded. Now upon the floor of that radiant chamber he saw priest and priestess, Sharane and Claneth, and around them the bodies of many women and men. There was a high altar half hidden by a cloud of sparkling azure mist. Within the mist, upon that altar that had been built by unseen hands, a wondrous ship was growing. And ever as that ship grew, Kenton saw far beyond it, as though it were its shadow cast into another dimension, another ship growing, a ship that seemed to build itself out of a turquoise sea in a world of silver clouds. Step by step, that shadow ship followed the building of the puppet ship upon the altar. He knew that the shadow was the real. The toy being shaped upon the altar was but the symbol. He knew, too, that symbol and reality were one, things linked by an ancient wisdom, things created by ancient powers, of which the fate and fortunes of one must be the fate and fortune of the other. Duo form, one a puppet and one real, and each the same. Now the unseen hands within the mists of azure had finished the ship. They reached down and touched, one by one, the bodies of Ishtar's priestess and Nergal's priest, Sharane and Claneth, and all who lay around them. And as they touched, those still forms vanished. The unseen hands lifted and placed, one by one, puppets on the puppet ship. Upon the decks of the shadow ship, on the turquoise sea, in the world of silver clouds, bodies lay. One by one they gathered there, as the toys were set in place upon the toy ship on the altar. At last there were no more still forms upon the floor of the council chamber of the gods. The ship was made and manned. A ray shot out from the radiance that veiled Ishtar and touched the ship's bow. A tendril of darkness uncoiled from the blackness in which brooded the Lord of the Dead, and his darkness touched the ship's stern. That picture wavered and fled. There appeared another chamber, small, almost a crypt. In it stood a single altar. Over the altar hung a lamp, nimbused by an aureole of azure, and the altar was of lapis lazuli and turquoise, and studded with sapphires of clearest blue. And Kenton knew that this was some secret shrine of Nabu, Lord of Wisdom. On the altar rested the ship. As Kenton looked upon it, it was borne to him again that this jeweled toy, this gleaming symbol, was linked inseparably with that other ship sailing in another space, another dimension, sailing on strange seas in an unknown world. The ship that he was on! And that, as the toy fared, so fared the ship. And as the ship fared, so fared the toy. Each threatened when one was threatened, sharing each the other's fate. That picture faded. He looked upon a walled city out of which towered a high temple, a terraced temple, a ziggurat. A host besieged the city. Its walls were covered with its warriors. He knew that the city was ancient Uruk, and the high temple that in which the ship had been built. And as he looked, the besiegers broke through the walls, overwhelmed the defenders. He had a glimpse of red carnage. That picture fled. Again he saw the crypt of Nabu. There were 2 priests there now. The ship rested upon the floor on a lattice of silvery metal. Over the altar hovered a little shining blue cloud. It came to him that the 2 priests were obeying a voice in that cloud, saving the ship and those who sailed on it from the invaders. They poured over it from huge basins a fine mortar that was like powder of ivory flecked with dust of pearls. It covered and hid the shining ship. Where ship had been was now a block of stone. The cloud vanished. Other priests entered, dragged the block out, through corridors and into the court of the temple. There they left it. Into the court swarmed the victors, looting and slaying. But ever unheeding, they passed the rough block by, the block that held the ship. Now he looked upon another walled city, great and beautiful. He knew it for Babylon in the full moon of its power. Another ziggurat took its place. That melted, and Kenton looked upon another secret shrine of Nabu within it. The little blue cloud rested again upon the altar. The block lay beside it, and blue-robed priests worked on it, smoothing, polishing, cutting on a glistening surface the arrow-headed cuneiform. The warning of Nabu, God of wisdom. Flickered thereafter before him fleeting pictures of battles and triumphs, pageant and disaster, quick, broken scenes of temple and city lost and won and lost once more, destroyed only to be built again in greater grandeur, then fallen, abandoned by the gods, then crumbling, abandoned by man, the desert creeping on it, at the last covering it, then forgotten. But always, no matter what the passing fate of the city, he saw the block in which lay the ship endure, untouched by fire, shielded from destruction, passed by pillagers, ignored by conquerors. There came a whirlpool of images, gray and indistinct in the swiftness of their passing. They steadied. He saw men working in the sands that were Babylon's shroud. He recognized among them Forsyth. He saw the block unearthed, borne away by tall Arabs, saw it crated into a primitive cart drawn by patient little rough-coated ponies, watched it tossing in the hold of a ship that sailed a sea he knew, watched it carried into his own house. He looked upon himself as he freed the ship. He looked again into the shadowy eyes. "Judge," sighed the harp strings. "Not yet," whispered the still voice. Kenton looked again into that immeasurable space wherein he had first seen radiant power and dark. But now he saw within it countless flames like those which had burned in breasts of Ishtar's priestess and the Lord of Death's priest, saw infinity flecked and flaming with them. They burned deep down through the shadows, and by their light up from the darkness came groping multitude upon multitude of other flames that had been shrouded by the darkness. He saw that without those flames the radiance of itself would be but a darkness. He saw the ship as though it floated in that same space. As he gazed, a deeper shadow flitted from the soul of the blackness and brooded over it. Instantly something of the soul of the radiance rayed out and met it. They strove one against the other. The ship was a focus of hatred and of wrath from which visibly waves swung out in ever-widening circles. As they circled outward from the ship, the shadow lines that ran from the core of darkness grew darker, thicker, as though they sucked strength from those waves. But under their beat, the radiance dulled, and the countless flames flickered and swayed and were troubled. "Judge," whispered the cold tones of Nabu. Now Kenton, in this dream of his, if dream it was, faced dilemma, hesitated. No trivial matter was it to indict this power. Ishtar, goddess, or whatever that power might be in this alien world where certainly it was powerful indeed. Besides, had he not prayed to Ishtar, and had she not answered his prayer? Yes, but he had prayed to Nabu too, and Nabu was Lord of Truth. He made up his mind, and his thoughts shaped themselves into words of his own tongue, his familiar idioms. "If I were a god," he said simply enough, "and had made things with life, things with lives to live, men and women, or whatever they might be, I would not make them imperfect so that they must, perforce, through their imperfections, break my laws. Not if I were all-powerful and all-wise, as I have gathered gods and goddesses are supposed to be, unless, of course, I had made them only for toys to play with. And if I found that I had made them imperfect, and that therefore they did wrong, I would think that it was I who was responsible for their sinning, since being all-powerful and all-wise, I could have made them perfect, but did not. And if I had made them for my toys, I surely would not heap upon them heartbreak and misery, pain and sorrow, no punishments. O Ishtar, not if they were toys that could feel these things, for what would they be but puppets dancing through their day as I had fashioned them to do?" "Of course," said Kenton naively, and with no ironic intention, "I am no god, and most certainly could not be a goddess, nor until I came into this world have I had any conscious experience with either. Yet, speaking as a man, even if I had punished any one who had broken my laws, I would not let my anger run on and hurt any number of people who had nothing whatever to do with the original cause of my anger. Yet that, if what I have just beheld was true, is what this battle is about to be waged for the ship seems to bring about." "No," said Kenton very earnestly, and quite forgetting the vague faces hovering over him. "I can't see any justice in the torment of that priest and priestess. And if the struggle for the ship does the damage it appeared to, I certainly would stop it if I could. For one thing, I would be afraid that shadow might get too thick sometime and pull all the little flames out. And for another, if I had spoken a word in anger that made all the misery, I wouldn't let that word be stronger than myself. I wouldn't as a man, and if I were a god or a goddess, very certainly, indeed, I would not." There was a silence. Then, "The man has judged," whispered the still voice. "He has judged." The vast ripple of the harp strings was almost as cold as that other. "I will recall my word. Let the strife end." The two faces vanished. He raised his head and saw around him the familiar walls of the rosy cabin. Had it been all a dream? Not all. Those scenes he had beheld had been too clear-cut, too consecutive, too convincing. Deep within him he knew that none of it had been dream. Beside him Sharane stirred, turned his face to hers. "What were you dreaming, John Kenton?" she asked. "You were murmuring and muttering strange words that I could not understand." He bent and kissed her. "I greatly fear, heart of mine, that I have offended that goddess of yours," he said. "Oh, John Kenton, but no, how?" Sharane's eyes were terrified. "By telling her the truth," answered Kenton, then unveiled to Sharane all of that vision. "I forgot she is a woman," he ended a bit ruefully. "Oh, but beloved, she is all women," cried Sharane. "Well, that makes it all the worse then," laughed Kenton, reckless. He leaped up, whistling gaily, threw cloak about him, and went out to talk to Gigi. But Sharane did not join in his laughter, sat thinking long after he had gone, with troubled eyes, at last walked to the empty shrine, threw herself before it, prostrate, praying. End of section 32.
Chapter 33 of The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. The ship is freed. "What began on the ship must end on the ship," said Gigi, nodding bald head wisely when Kenton had told him also of that vision of the two faces. "Nor do I think we shall have long to wait before we see that end." "And after?" asked Kenton. "Who knows?" Gigi shrugged broad shoulders. "No rest for us, Wolf, while Cloneth lives. Nay, I think I know what this darkening of shadows on Black Deck means. By those shadows Cloneth watches us. They tell him where we are, or so it comes to me. They are the thread by which he follows us. Also, my skin is sensitive, Wolf, and it tells me the Black Priest is not so far away. When he comes, well, we conquer him or he conquers us, that is all. Also, I do not think that you can count on any help from Ishtar. Remember that in your vision, she promised only that the strife of the Wrathful One and the Dark One should end. She made no promises, I gather, as to Sharane, or you, or the rest of us." "That will be well," said Kenton cheerfully, "as long as I am given chance to stand fairly, face to face, with that swine bred from Hell's Swill, I am content." "But I think you gathered that she was not mightily pleased with what you had to say to her," said Gigi slyly. "That is no reason for punishing Sharane," answered Kenton, harking back to his old thought. "How else would she punish you?" asked Gigi maliciously. Then suddenly grew serious, all impishness gone. "Nay, Wolf," he said, and laid a paw on Kenton's shoulder. "There is little chance for us. And yet, if all your vision were true, and the little flames you saw were real, what matters it? Only, said Gigi wistfully, when those flames that were you and Sharane journey forth into that space, and another flame comes to you that was once Gigi of Nineveh, will you let it journey with you? Gigi! There were tears in Kenton's eyes. Wherever we go in this place or any other, no matter what may happen, you go with us as long as you will. Good wolf, muttered Gigi, arms around him. There came a shout from Sigurd at the rudder. He pointed over the ship's bow. To Sharane's door they sped with her through the cabin of the maids and out beneath the sickled prow. The inverted semisphere of silvery mist that were sky had expanded. The smooth blue sea stretched from horizon to far distant. Across that horizon ran a far-flung line of towers and minarets, turrets and spires and steeples, skyscrapers and mosques, a huge chevaux de frise. From where they stood, the outlines of this bristling barrier seemed too regular, too smoothly shaped, to be other than the work of man. Was it another city? The refuge they had sought? A place where they might stay, safe from Cloneth and his pack until they could sally forth to meet that pack and its master on more equal terms? Yet if a city, what giants were they who had reared it? The oars dipped faster. The ship sped. Closer came the barrier. It was no city. Up from the depths of the turquoise sea thrust thousands of rocks. Rocks blue and yellow. Rocks striped crimson and virid malachite. Rocks all glowing ochre and rocks steeped in the scarlet of autumn sunsets. A polychrome Venice of a lost people of stone, sculptured by stone titans. Here a slender minaret arose 200 feet in the air, yet hardly more than 10 in thickness. Here a pyramid as great as the Cheops, its 4 sides as accurately faced. By thousands, as far as the eye could reach, the rocks arose in fantasies of multicolored cone and peak, aguile and minaret and obelisk, campanile and tower. Straight up from the depths they lifted, and between them the sea flowed in a maze of channels, both narrow and broad, some of the channels smoothly, in others with swift eddies and whirlpools and racing torrents, and in others the sea lay like a placid pool. There came another shout from the Viking, urgent, summoning, and with it the clangor of his sword beating upon his shield. Back they darted to him. Down upon the ship, and little more than a mile away, rushed a long line of other ships, a score or more of them, both single and double-banked, boats of war racing on oars that dipped and rose with swiftness of sword-blade stroke. Between them and the ship, a lean and black bireme leaping the waves like a wolf. The pack of Cloneth with the black priest in the lead. The pack, breaking out of the mists, unseen by Sigurd, eyes like the others fast upon the colossal fantasy of stone that seemed to be on the end of this strange world. "In among the rocks!" cried Kenton. "Quick!" "A trap!" said Sigurd. "A trap for them as well as us, then," answered Kenton. "At the least, they cannot ring us there with their boats." "The only chance," grunted Gigi. The slaves bent their backs. Through a wide channel between 2 painted monolithic minarets flew the ship. Behind them, they heard a shouting, a baying as of hungry hounds in sight of a deer. Now they were within the maze, and the rowers must go slowly, and the Viking's rudder craft was needed indeed, for the current swung them, gripping at bow and stern, and the sheer rocks menaced. Twisting, turning, on and on they went, until the painted rocks closed from the sight of the open sea. Yet now, too, Cloneth and his pack were in the maze. They heard the creak of the oars, the command of the helmsman, searching for them, ferreting them out. Abruptly, as though snapped out, light vanished, and darkness fell. It blotted out the channel they were following, blotted out the towering rocks. From the pursuing boats came horn blasts, orders with shrill and fear, outcries. A purplish glow sprang within the blackness. Dimly by it the 4 could see the outlines of the ship, their own tense faces. "Nergal! Nergal comes! Off the black deck while we can!" She gripped Kenton's hands, moved to the steps leading from the rudder to the post deck, Viking and Gigi behind them. Slowly they went, for the shadows seemed to cling to them, to coil themselves round feet and knees, hold them back. They passed through the clutching shadows as through undertow of nightmare. But not yet were the shadows strong enough to hold them. They passed black deck, stood panting, spent, upon the space before the cabin of Sharane. Now the whole black deck was blotted out again, as though an inky cloud had leapt upon it. And now, from every quarter of the horizon whirled pillars of darkness. Their feet were in the sullen sea, their heads lost in that pall that spread above. Ahead of them drove a charnel odor, the breath of death. "Nergal in all his might," shouted Sharane's voice. "But Ishtar promised the strife should end," groaned Kenton. "But she did not say how it would end," wailed Sharane. "And, oh beloved, Ishtar comes no more to me, and all my power is gone." "Ishtar! Ishtar!" she cried, and caught Kenton in her arms. "Mother! My life for this man's, my soul for his! Mother Ishtar!" The van of the whirling pillars was close, the circle between them and the ship swiftly narrowing. Before they could roll over the ship, and on the echo of Sharane's cry, a blinding light, pearl white and pearl rose, flashed down upon them, on Sharane, the 3 men and the 3 warrior maids crouched white-faced at Sharane's feet. High over their heads, thrice the height of the mast, a great globe of moonfire hung poised, effulgent, serene, and brighter, far brighter than a score of moons at full. From its periphery, enclosing the whole forepart of the ship as in a tent of light, poured rays, a radiance that ringed them, and in whose center they stood as though prisoned in a hollow cone, whose top was the moon globe. Around that radiant tent, the pillared darknesses churned, pressing for entrance, finding none. Faint at first, and far away began a keen-edged shrieking. Louder it grew, as though from racing hordes of screaming fiends fresh loosed from abandon. The purple darkness lightened, turned to a lurid violet. It was pricked by countless points of crimson fire. And now the myriads of fiery points were at the ship, striking like little snakes of fire at globe and sides of radiant tent, shooting at them like arrowheads of fire, thrusting like little lance tips of fire. Came the whir and rustle of thousands of wings. Around, calm globe and cone of light whirled the doves of Ishtar in thousands. And as the points of fire struck and stabbed, the doves darted to meet them. Like little living shields of shining silver, they caught the thrusts of the fiery javelins upon their breasts. Where were the doves coming from? Cloud upon cloud of them poured from above the embattled moon orb. Yet for each whose ashes were whirled away, a score rushed to meet in the striking fires, and all the air was palpitant with the tumult of their wings. And as each dove fell, blackened and blasted, the fire that had slain died with it. The hellish shrieking raised itself a full octave. The inky cloud that had leapt upon the black deck shot up, towering, gigantic, into the heavens. The countless points of fire rushed together, coalesced. They became a crimson scimitar of fire that struck and struck down upon the shining orb and ship. Before the first stroke could fall, the phalanxes of doves had wheeled, had formed themselves into a shield mighty enough to have been held and wielded by Ishtar's own arm. Ever as the scimitar of fire slashed and thrust at the radiant globe and ship, the shield of the doves met it. Fiery point and fiery edge struck and blackened the living agent, but could not pierce. And ever the seared wounds of that shield shimmered moon-white, as soft, untouched silver breasts darted in and healed them. The scimitar was dimming. No longer were its fires so crimson bright. The moon orb pulsed. Its radiance flamed wide, dazzlingly, blindingly, hurling back the darknesses. Swiftly as it had come, it vanished. With it went the doves. Kenton saw the gigantic scimitar pause, quiver uncertainly, as though the dread hand that held it had been stilled with sudden doubt. Then down it swept once more. In mid-sweep another sword met it, a sword of brilliant light. The light of those flames he had seen in his vision, and that were the life of that radiance that fructified the swarms of worlds. Their light? Why, it was forged of those flames. It was the sword of those flames. It met the scimitar, and the blade of the Lord of Death was shattered. He heard a voice, the voice of Ishtar. "I have beaten you, O Nergal. Your fires are no match for my flames." And Nergal snarling, "A trick, Ishtar. Not with you, but with your sister self was my warfare to be." And again Ishtar, "No trick, Nergal. I never said that I would not fight you. The strife is ended. Yet this I will grant. Though you have lost the ship, I will not take it. The ship is free." Then Nergal, grudgingly, snarling still, "The strife is ended. The ship is free." For one beat in time, Kenton seemed to see a vast vague face gazing down upon the ship, a face in which were all the tendernesses of all mothers, all loving women beneath the sun. The shadowy eyes dwelt softly on Sharane, softly but enigmatically upon him. The face was gone. As when a shutter is dropped before a closed lamp, so the darkness had fallen, and abruptly, as when the shutter is lifted, so the darkness fled. Light took its place. The ship lay in a wide channel. Around it, the phantasmagoria of the sea floored the city of stone. At port, a thicket of obelisks, all dull greens and glaring vermilions, raised tops on high. 3 arrow flights on starboard, a painted monolith arose, pyramidal, its pointed tip hundreds of feet in air. Around an edge of it crept the black bireme of Cloneth. End of chapter 33. Read by Alan Schulte. Chicago, September 24th, 2022.
Chapter 34 of The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Micaela Harper. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. The Ship's Last Battle. Sight of that lean boat that like a lankhound now came leaping at them was like wine to Kenton, like strong wine to all. Heavy upon them had hung the dread conflict just past. They, but midges, dancing helplessly now in the fierce radiance of life's spirit, now stilling as helplessly in the blackness of life's negation. The charnel odor was still in Kenton's nostrils, the chill of the grave on his heart, the touch of the worm upon his eyes. But there on the black priest ship, were things he knew, sword edge, and biting arrow point, death. It might be but death, with the pulses beating like war drums. Hot death, striking in as the red tides of life rushed out. Things understandable. Reality. Reaction swept them all. He heard the clarion of Sharane's voice trumpeting golden defiance, the roar of Gigi, the shouting of Sigurd, and he was shouting too, challenging the black priest, daring him, taunting him, menacing him. Silently, the lean ship dove on them. "Sigurd, to the helm!" Sanity returned to Kenton. "Make for a narrow channel, one we can row, but one that will force them to draw in their upper bank of oars. Thus we will equal their speed, at the least." The Viking ran back to the tiller. The whistle of the overseer shrilled in the rower's pit. The ship leaped forward. It swept round the obelisks, the bireme now only 2 arrow flights behind, and into a wide lake of blue water, bordered by 100 magenta domes set on huge cubes of damask. The turquoise tides ran between the mathematically spaced sides of the cubes in 100 canals, each barely wide enough for the oars of the ship to dip without touching the stone. "In there! Take any channel!" shouted Kenton. The ship heeled, darted to the closest opening. A flight of arrows from the bireme whistled into their wake, 5 ship lengths short. The huge blocks with their moss tops bordered the narrow canal, into which they had passed. For a full mile, the open way stretched, straight ahead of them. A third through, and they heard the bireme sweeps clanking, saw it come swinging on a single bank of oars into the entrance. Quicker, at Kenton's command, dipped the ship's blades. Heavier than the ship, the bireme fell behind. And as they flew through the blue water, Kenton and Sharane took swift counsel with Gigi and the Viking back at the stern. "Ravens gather!" chanted the Viking, eyes brightening with fey battle fires. "Shield maidens ride from Valhalla! I hear the feet of their horses." "They may return empty-handed," exclaimed Kenton. "Nay, Sigurd, Now we have our only chance. None but the Black Priest has yet smelled us out. Let us pick our place and give battle to him."
"We are but 7, and there are many times 7 on that byreme, Wolf,"
said Gigi, doubtful it seemed, although his little eyes sparkled.
"I run no longer from the black swine,"
cried Kenton hotly.
"I am weary of dodging and skulking, Gigi. I say let us play the game out now. What does your thought tell you, Sharane?"
he asked. "My thought is as yours," she answered him tranquilly. "As you will it, so is my will, beloved."
"What do you say, Norseman?" asked Gigi. "Quick now, decide."
"I am with the wolf," replied Sigurd. "No time better than now. In the old days, when I was a dragon master, there was a trick we played when we were chased by a stranger. Have you seen the dog when the cat turns on him?"
"Ho ho!"
laughed the Viking.
"Swift flies the cat until it has reached a corner, and there it lurks until dog yelps past. Then out springs cat upon it, digging deep its claws, striking at eyes, raking dog's side."
"Ho ho!" roared Sigurd.
"Swift we would fly like a cat until we had found a place to turn and skulk. Then, as other dragons sped by, out we would spring upon it. Like the dog, loud would it howl while we clung and tore. Ho! Let us find such a corner where we may lurk till this hell-dog of Black Priest leaps past. Then we shall spring. Give me 2 of the maids to guard me here as I steer. You 3, with the other maid, stand by the crossbows, and when I shear their oars loose the fire shafts upon them."
"In the meantime," asked Gigi, face wrinkling, "what about their own arrows?"
"We must take our luck as it comes," said Kenton. "Gigi, I am one with Sigurd, unless you have a better plan to offer."
"No,"
answered Gigi. "No, I have none, Wolf." He lifted his great body, shook long arms on high.
"By the hollowed hells and Ishik their keeper,"
roared Gigi.
"I, too, am weary of running away.
I ran away from my princess because of my bald head, and what luck did it bring me? By Nazor, the Eater of Hearts. Nay, by Zubran," his voice softened, "who gave his life for us. I run no more. Pick your place, Wolf, you and the Norseman, and let us fight." He waddled away, then turned. "The end of the channel draws close," he said. "Sharane, between hearts of you and your maids and arrow points are only soft breasts and a fold of cloth. Don coats of mail like ours, and caps and buckskins, and greaves for your knees. I go to put on another link shirt, and get me my mace." He dropped down the steps. Kenton nodded, and after Gigi trooped Sharane and her 3 women to doff their robes and kirtles, don battle garb. "And after you have shorn their oars, if you do?" asked Kenton of the Viking, lingering.
"Then we return and ram,"
said Sigurd.
"So we did in the old days.
The ship is lighter than Black Priest galley, and far more quickly can she turn. When we ram, be all of you at bow ready, to beat off any who try to drop aboard. After the galley is both shorn and rammed, we can tear at it as we will, like the cat." The end of the canal was near. Half a mile behind, the byreme clung to the ship's wake. Out of her cabin came Sharane and her 3 maids, 4 slender warriors in coats of mail, hair hidden under brown linked caps, leathern buckskins on legs and greaves at knees. They piled arrows on stern and bow, with Gigi seeing to it that crossbows were in order.
tow and oil and flints ready. The ship swept out of the canal, hung on reversed oars while Kenton and the Viking took survey. At left and right, in two great arcs, ran high walls of unbroken crimson rock. Smooth and precipitous, continuing, they would make a circle a mile or more in diameter. But whether they did so continue, Kenton could not see. Out of the waters they walled. In its center, if they encircled it, a huge pinnacle lifted, its needlepoint thrice the height of the walls, shutting off the further view. Its pedestal was one colossal block, octahedral, shaped like a star. Out from it rayed the star points, long and narrow like titanic wedges, their ends 50 feet high and edged like knife.
"We go to the left," said Sigurd. "Let the black dog know which way we turn."
Kenton leaped to the cabin's top, waved derisive arms, heard shouting.
"Good!"
rumbled Sigurd.
"Now let them come, for here, Wolf, we make our stand. Look."
He pointed as the ship drove past the first star point.
"Between tip of stone and wall there is little more than room for ship and galley to pass each other. Also the stone is high and hides us when we have passed. Yes, it is the place. Yet, not here beyond the first star tip shall we lurk. Claneth may expect that and come by it slowly and alert, nor beyond the second, for again he may come slowly, though surely not so slowly as before. But not finding us there, he will believe that we have but one thought, and that to escape. So, he will pass the third tip at speed to close in on us. And it is there that we shall leap out upon him."
"Good," said Kenton, and dropped down to the deck, stood beside Sharane and Gigi, told them the Vikings' plan, and Gigi grunted approval and walked away to test once more the crossbows. But Sharane locked mailed arms round Kenton's neck and drew his face close to hers and drank him with wistful eyes that seemed as though they could not drink enough. "Is it the end, beloved?" she whispered. "There shall be no end for us, O heart of mine," he answered. They stood, so silent, thinking many things, while the second star point wheeled by. And now the third leveled its tip at them, and Sigurd cried out to raise oars, and when the ship had swum 100 yards or so, brought her sharply around. He called to him. The overseer made plain the plan.
"We strike at the byream's left bank of oars,"
he said.
"No wish have I to run risk of spitting the ship on that edge of rock. When I shout, draw in your left sweeps. When we have sheared and passed, whip the slaves again into full speed. When we have rammed, reverse oars and pull free. Is that clear?"
The black's eyes glistened. He bared white teeth, ran back to the pit. Now, from beyond the great stone wedge came faint rasp of sweeps, the splashing of oars. 2 of the warrior women sped back to Sigurd, crouched beside him, arrows ready at slits of the high shields. A tenseness gripped the ship. "One kiss, John Kenton," whispered Sharane, eyes now misty. Their lips clung. Nearer came the oar sounds. Closer, closer, faster, speeding. A low whistle from the Viking, and the rowers of the ship bent backs under sting of whip. A dozen strong strokes, and the ship leaped like a dolphin straight for the star tip. Past tip it shot, heeled as the Viking vigorously threw rudder sharp to starboard. 10 ship lengths ahead of them was the byream, racing on its forefold, multiple feet of oars like an enormous water spider. And as the ship flashed out, and at it a roar arose from its crowded decks, a shouting, confused and clamorous, medley of wild commands, and filling all that clamor, bewilderment, and stark amaze. The oars of the byreme faltered, stopped at mid-stroke, held rigid, just touching sea.
Faster!
Howled Sigurd, and as the pit's whip cracked, drove with a twist of the rudder the ship down parallel to the course of the galley.
In oars!
He howled again. The scimitar prow of the ship struck the byreme's sweeps. It swept through them like a blade through brittle stubble. Broken, splintered, the long shafts fell, holding back the rush of the ship, as little as though they had been straws. But in the galley, those who gripped the great handles fell back with ribs crushed, backs snapped, as the heavy stocks were flung against them. Up from the ship's side as it passed, up into the ranks staring down on it. Ranks turned wooden with surprise of that unexpected attack. Hissed the fireballs from the crossbows, hissing like serpents of fire, expanding as the air fanned them. The fireballs struck, hurling back the soldiers, searing them, flaming up as they fell on deck and into open hold and touching with fingers of inextinguishable flame all that would burn. Again, the galley roared, and now with touch of terror in its voice. The ship was clear. Down thrust the withdrawn oars of it. Straight ahead she flew into the wider space beyond star-tip of stone and circling wall. Swift once more the Viking turned her. Back raced the ship upon the byreme, and the byreme swung helplessly, sidled grotesquely like a huge spider from one of whose sides all legs had been cut, slithered like that same spider toward the knife-edged tip of the Stone Star ray. From hold and deck, little columns of smoke swirled. Now Sigurd realized all that galley's peril, saw that it was close to piercing stone ray, saw that he might drive it upon the ray, send stone blade biting into it, destroy it.
Guard bow!
Shouted Sigurd. He threw back the rudder, made wider turn, hurtled upon the galley, not at stern as he had planned, but far toward midship. The ram struck and bit deep, ship's prow too. Under the impact, Kenton and the others toppled over, and before they could set foot on bow, fell prone on faces, clutching at deck. Beneath the blow, the byreme reeled, heeled under the seas, sucked over its farther side. Down dipped its starboard oars, seeking to thrust back from the menacing stone. The sweeps churned, but under the weight of the ship, clinging to its flank, its bow turned sharply in. It struck the knife edge of the rock. There was a crackling as the rock bit through the hull.
Ho! Roared the Viking. Drown, you rats!
Down upon the ship whistled an arrow cloud. The shafts shrilled over Kenton, staggering to his feet. They pierced deck and pit. Before the rowers could backsweeps, pull free, they dropped, hung limp over oars, bristling with quivering bolts. On the ship's bow fell a dozen grapples, holding it fast to the wrecked galley. Ropes whirled from the galley, and sliding down them came the swordsmen.
Back! Back to me!
Shouted Sigurd. The byreme shuddered. Its gashed bow slid down the rock edge for a dozen feet or more, the water pouring over its foredeck. Up from the sea bobbled heads of soldiers, washed away and swimming for the ship. On the deck of the galley, a milling began as those on it fought to drop upon the ship.
Back!
Cried Kenton. He caught Sharane's arm. They ran, with heads bent low, as from the steersman's place, the arrows of the Viking and his flanking maids winged into the mass of men swarming over the rosy cabin. The galley slipped again along the cleaving edge of stone, checked fall with bow, half under water, yet held by the ship's ram. But that last slipping had wrenched sharply down the ship's own prisoned bow. As the deck tilted, Kenton fell, dragging Sharane with him. He caught swift glimpse of men dropping from the byream's side, throwing themselves into the sea, striking for the ship. He scrambled to his feet as the soldiers at the bow rushed. And now Gigi sprang past him, twirling his great mace. Kenton leaped to his side, Sharane at his heels.
Back to Sigurd,
grunted the Ninevite, club sweeping the soldiers before it like a flail among wheat.
Too late,
cried Sharane. Too late. Men were swarming up the stern chains, clambering up from the sea, tearing away the shields, flowing up from the black deck. From the byream came a howling, frenzied, beast-like. At its sound, even the soldiers halted. Gigi's mace hung in the air. Then upon the ship leaped the black priest. Pale eyes, pools of hellfire, mouth an open square from which hell's own blackest hate flew screaming. He hurled himself through the swordsman, dived under Gigi's falling mace, and flung himself on Kenton. While before he could turn to help, the swordsmen were on Gigi, stabbing, cutting, darting in and out as the great mace rose and fell, tearing at him as wolves tear at a moose at bay. But Kenton was ready. Out flashed the blue blade and met the thrust of the black priest's sword. Yet, quicker than he, that sword swept back, bit with a paralyzing agony into that old wound in his side. Kenton staggered, hilt half dropping from his hand. Howling now in triumph, Clenneth swept down the death blow. Before it could fall, Sharane had thrown herself between Kenton and priest, had parried the stroke with her own sword. The left hand of the black priest shot out, dagger in its grip, buried that dagger in Sharane's breast. Now all the world was but one red flame before Kenton. One red flame in which was nothing but Clenneth's hellish face. Ere the black priest could move, swifter than the lightning stroke, Kenton had struck. The blue sword bit down, shearing away half the black priest's face, leaving in place of cheek and chin, eye and ear, only a red smear. Bit on down into his bull neck and half through his shoulder. The black priest's sword clanged upon the deck. He stood for an instant, the one eye glaring, terror, agony dulling the hell flame in it. The sword of Kenton bit again, straight through the black priest's neck, and still, with that one eye glaring hideously, the head of Clenneth leaped from his huge shoulders, struck the rail and whirled into the sea. For another instant, the gross hulk of the body stood, the neck spouting, then crashed. No further heed paid Kenton to him, nor to the byream's men. He bent over his love, raised her in tender arms.
Sharane, Sharane,
he called, and kissed the pale lips, the closed eyes.
Beloved, come back to me.
The eyes opened. The slim hands made effort to lift, to caress. Follow me, beloved, whispered Sharane. Her head dropped upon his breast. And now Kenton, standing there with his dead love in his arms, looked about the ship. All around him were what were left of the galley's crew, fierce faces staring at him, but silent, making no move.
Sigurd!
He called, and sought the Viking with his gaze. On the helmsman's deck was a great heap of slain, and under them, the Viking. Gigi, he whispered. There was no Gigi. Where Gigi had wielded his giant flail, the dead were thick, and under them, as under the dead that were the Viking's shroud, lay Gigi. Sharane, Gigi, Sigurd, Kenton sobbed. Gone, all gone. The ship lurched, shuddered. He took a step forward. Sharane clutched to his breast. A bow twanged. An arrow caught him in his side. He did not care. Let them kill him. Sharane was gone. And Gigi? Why was it that he could no longer feel Sharane's loved body in his arms? Where had the staring soldiers gone? Where was the ship? There was nothing around him but darkness. Darkness and a roaring tempest sweeping toward him out of farthest space. And through that darkness, seeking in it as he fled for sight of Sharane, reaching out, faltering hands for touch of her, whirled Kenton, and swaying, sobbing with weakness and with heartbreak, opened eyes to look again upon his old room. End of chapter 34.
Chapter 35 of The Ship of Ishtar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt. The Broken Toy. For a little time he stood, half in stupor, seeing less the room than swift, fleeting pictures of that last battle. His gaze caught at last the long mirror, held there. With a faint stirring of curiosity he looked at the white, pain-drawn face staring from it, the haggard, sorrow-filled eyes. So that was he, the arrow in his side? Ah, yes, that at least he had brought with him from the ship, that and the greater wound from which his life was flowing. There was a chiming, a bell was striking, 1, 2, 3, the clock, of course. This was a world of time, not like that world of the ship. The ship! He staggered over to where lay that shining craft of mystery that had given him all his heart and mind had craved, and at the last had taken all away. Sharane! There she lay, on the platform beside the rowers' pit, not far from the deck of ivory, a gleaming little 3-inch toy, a gemmed puppet with tiny dagger hilt fast in her white breast. Sharane! Sharane, who had held for him all joy, all sweetness of life, all desirable delicious things, a witched toy. He shook his head. Never would that doubt assail him again. And that black headless mannequin so close, the black priest, toys. He set his hand again to the wound in his side, felt of the arrow, and laughed. No toys had made that wound, no toy sped that shaft. But where were the soldiers from the Bareem? He looked upon the ship's stern. There lay another puppet, one with yellow hair and chipped and gashed armour, sword still clasped in hand. Sigurd! And the 2 slim warriors stretched beside him. Why, they were the maids of Sharane who had fought there with him. And there beyond the headless body of the black priest, was Gigi. Gigi with his great arms asprawl, his dwarf legs under him. Gigi with his little bald head shining under a ray of the electrics. Gigi. Kenton's hand left Sharane. The toy caressed the grotesque puppet. But where were the soldiers? Where that other maid of his lost love? He bent forward, incredulous. The whole bow of the ship was gone. It had vanished even as he had knelt there, melted away, and with it the rosy cabin of Sharane's and his delight. And as he looked the ship seemed to lurch. As cabin had gone, so went ivory deck up to the rowers' pit, and with it Gigi. Even the toy going? Was that, too, to be taken from him before he followed Sharane out into that flame-lit space of his vision? If such place there was. Longing for her kisses, the touch of her hands, the sound of her voice shook him. Loneliness and the pall of the utterly forlorn. Sharane! He whispered, and gripped the little puppet with trembling hand. Sharane! He called again. Sharane! Beloved! Wait for me! The ship crumbled to within an inch of where she lay. Sharane! Wailed Kenton, and above him the servants heard that agonized cry and came hurrying to his door. And now he threw the last of his strength into the gripping fingers, wrenched loose the little figure, held it to his lips. And now where ship had been was nothing but the oblong base of foam-crested turquoise waves. Down had gone the galley of the Black Priest into the depths of that strange sea, dragging with it, as it went, the ship of Ishtar. So Kenton knew, and knowing that as ran the fate of living ships, so must run the fate of the toy which was its symbol. The bell chime echoed back into his brain. 3 o'clock. 9 hours of the time of this world into which he had been born had passed since first he had set foot on the ship's deck. 9 hours only. Only 9 hours. In those 9 hours he had been both slave and master of the ship, had been lashed and loved, had drunk his fill of life, lived as it is given to but few men in tens of centuries, had possessed Sharane. Sharane! He pressed the toy to his lips, weakened, death close. That toy held to his lips and breast was to him Sharane. There was a knocking at the door, rappings and cries. He gave them no heed. Sharane! He called again, but now with voice that sang with joy. He fell, the toy at lips, gripping tight in stiffening hand. Break down the door! Shrilled Jevons from the hall. There came the thud of shoulders against the heavy wood. Where ship had been something stirred. A shadowy great bird with silver wings and breast and feet and bill of scarlet. It arose, it hovered over Kenton. A dove of Ishtar! It hovered, and then upon its white breast 2 flames whiter than it appeared and clung. The shadowy dove was gone. In crashed the door. Master John! Screamed Jevons, and ran to the body stretched out there on the floor. That's not the master, a maid whispered. Look at the scars on him, and the muscles. Kenton lay upon his face. Gently they turned him. His dead face smiled up at them. Peace upon it, and a great happiness. Fulfilment. Master John! Wept old Jevons. Oh, Master John! What's he holding in his hand? Whispered another servant. The hand was at Kenton's lips, clenched vice-like. They pried open at last the stubborn fingers. But Kenton's hand was empty. End of chapter 35, read by Inkell. End of The Ship of Ishtar by Abraham Merritt.